dun 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 dun. Wow. It's Matt Waldman. The 2018 NFL draft is upon us. And already it feels like we haven't had one quite like this before.
No kidding. It's such a rich class, and there's so much intrigue at the top. And you've had this kind of, I don't know whether it's good or bad Hollywood, but Hollywood drama at the top with the Cleveland Browns. I mean, almost like draft day come true, so it's interesting to see how this is all going to unfold, and we're going to be right here for it.
So look, John Dorsey has clearly made it a point that nobody knows for sure who they're going to pick, which is new. And it appears, and I think Jim Coburn, said Dorsey found the rat. And Will Brinson, love you, Will, doing a great job covering the NFL over at CBS Sports, says, at some point, John Dorsey knew like 6 weeks ago, which was right about Sam Darnold and Josh Allen's pro day, that Dorsey knew. And then at some point he told the Haslams, and then a day or two ago he told Hugh Jackson, which again goes back to the finding the rat, or also that everything about Cleveland's offseason makes sense except retaining Hugh Jackson. With some of this stuff in mind, and whatever else you want to add to the picture, what do you think about this idea of keeping the number one pick a secret? Also, I want to say from a four-dimensional chess point of view, with Cleveland holding the fourth pick, if they make it harder for the Giants to trade down from number 2, they could profit greatly from muddying the water so that they could be the team that someone trades up to for a quarterback at number 4.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it, is that they want to make sure that they don't tip their hand and have some bargaining chips at the table during the first 4 picks of this draft. And part of that is making sure that they don't reveal half of their hand at the top of the round. But there are some questions that you wonder about here. I mean, I think Scott McCloughan obviously has a great track record as a general manager and scout. But to me, the fundamental issue remains, if you've left in a coach who's been guilty of dysfunctional behavior, and you've left in people from the previous regime in the general manager's office who have also been maybe either part of the problem, or at least something that you want to move on from, it looks like. So you have multiple vice presidents with the same title, and you have a coach who's a leftover, and then you bring in Scott McCloughan, who, to me, when you bring in a consultant, for the most part, to advise on your entire draft, your process is broken.
Yeah.
You're still broken. If you're bringing in someone outside, you do not trust what you have right now. So when I look at this, I mean, again, there's so much at play with this quarterback position that you kind of wonder, I like Jim Coburn's point about maybe Hugh Jackson is the rat, and they're finding him out, and that's fine. But also, so are the journalists. So is the media. We're the rats too.
Oh yeah, we want to be the rats.
We want to.
We're doing our job well. We're the rats.
That cheese, yeah. So it's like, what better to do than to stay quiet all this time, and in the 9th hour, just before the draft starts, give a little bit of a hint of some misdirection that's even more desperate, so that all the big talking heads start talking about, talking about Baker Mayfield. Now, it's probably going to be Mayfield or Darnold. I think that's what most people probably think, and I think that makes a lot of sense from all the things we've seen leading up beforehand. But, Scott McCloughan, as our buddy Scott Bischoff at Football Guys said earlier today to me over the phone, was like, he's a known liar when it comes to trying to mislead the media about his plans, and he's done that pretty darn well over the years. So loving Baker Mayfield's one thing, picking him is another. And the one guy that nobody's talked about, as they're singing their song, and I'm drinking my Orpheus, Transmigration of Souls beer that I've just tried here out of Atlanta. And, the myth of Orpheus is that he's in hell, and we're in Brown's draft hell right now, and he kind of plays music to lead Eurydice out of here. Well, Eurydice, doesn't that rhyme with Dorsey a little bit? So maybe if we can, maybe if Scott McCloughan is Orpheus, maybe he's kind of trying to lead this team out of, singing a song about Baker Mayfield, and we might see Josh Rosen just kind of sneak out of there. Let's just hope that John Dorsey doesn't turn back and take a look at old Hades and have to keep coming back over and over again, which would basically mean he'd be, on major network TV and instead of in an NFL job, because I think isn't that kind of what happens to people who have to serve their time in Hades? I don't know if they were football
Yeah.
people.
Maybe this is it. No, and by the way, folks, Black Orpheus is a tremendous classic film, a wonderful retelling in Carnival in Rio. I think it was, God, at least 50 years old. We're getting old. No, okay, so who do you think it will be?
I think I think that the analytics guys want Mayfield.
Well, and the word is that Elliott Wolf, also from that Packers bloodline, and McLuhan are trying to convince them that Mayfield is Favre, just like Mayfield did. I think Dan Patrick actually dared him to recreate the famous jorts picture. I love Brett Favre playing along, by the way, saying, "Give me back the jorts when you're done." Mayfield is Favre. Anyway.
Okay.
More than one reported that, like, they're in there pounding on the table saying, "This is the guy."
I'm not going to make any comment about that one just yet. Maybe a little bit later, but I think Mayfield can be a competent NFL quarterback if you have a team that is aligned and coaching staffs aligned. This one is not, at least on the surface, until they get rid of Hugh Jackson or because I mean, really, what team just leaves a guy hanging out to dry when you have a guy like Todd Haley with his mind and his ability to adjust and just put him behind there? To me, it's kind of let's just say it's not a ballsy move, but it's related to that. Sure. I would say that's the kind of move it really is. And why would you do that? So that tells me that the ownership isn't aligned there. I still think it's going to be Darnold. As a Browns fan, I'm holding out hope that it's actually Rosen, because he is, to me, the best quarterback in this class. And I think that it would be the wisest choice, because as I've joked around, if the Browns are basically a Cold War scenario in their front office, when they hit that nuclear bomb, well, if everyone's acting like Josh Rosen's behavior is like cockroaches survived the nuclear war. So, the way I look at it is he's got the attitude to be tough enough to survive all this crazy mess. And so it's nice that they got Hugh Jackson up in front so everyone can see him in the war room as I'm watching here. But as we've seen, that's an honorary seat. Looks like they've got everybody behind him ready to push him out the door and down the stairs. So, it's a mess. What do you think? Who do you think it's going to be?
I mean, Lance Zierlein said it's Mayfield. Daniel Jeremiah put Mayfield #1 in his mock that came out this morning. Josina Anderson. And Matt, how many times on this show have we said Josina Anderson is reporting and she was the first one to get the scoop? Now, it is possible that, again, that last bit, the dye test was they're not taking Mayfield, but they told certain people that they're taking Mayfield, and they want to see who it gets out to and how it gets out. It's possible.
And what teams want Mayfield bad enough to maybe make some last-minute calls or to make some calls for Darnold to kind of get up underneath that. And then also on top of that, didn't we say that Mitchell Trubisky was going to be the first overall pick last year? Weren't there a lot of people in major media saying that at the 11th hour today? And did that happen? So, I'm wondering whether, we've gotten to a phase of this news to NFL cycle that the NFL is actually ahead of the news cycle at this state. Right. And you got to remember, I mean, there's been a lot of turnover in the media lately. So, these are kind of newbies in this area.
Yeah, it's such an interesting puzzle because, as you said, there's stuff about the role of the media, there's stuff about the new regime, there's stuff about the evaluation of the quarterbacks. And, I know that when John Dorsey described the quarterback he wanted back in December, it sounded like Baker Mayfield, accurate, winning, a leader. And that's certainly been something I think that's been consistent in the strengths of Baker Mayfield. I think that Darnold might be the most defensible pick because Scott Wright, longtime friend of the show, NFL Draft Countdown has been an outstanding draft site for as long as we've been doing this, Matt. Yeah. And he said, hey, and I think this is just an important point. I don't know if I would 100% co-sign to the strength of the point made, but if Baker Mayfield is the number one pick, and Baker Mayfield making it as a franchise level quarterback would be an outlier. And just like Josh Allen would be an outlier, and an outlier in terms of true greatness among human beings and football minds and wonderful people in general, joining us for the first hour and really the big reveal, although there's gonna be a lot of great reveals. You know him at Four Verts, you know him from the airport, Charles McDonald. And we've just been chewing on this idea of John Dorsey keeping this a secret in a way that we've never seen before. How does this strike you, the idea that we don't know minutes before the draft who's going number one?
Well, I think it's fun from a consumer point of view. That's always fun, having the, I guess, excitement of not knowing who the first pick is. Because I remember like back before we had the new CBA, I mean, we see guys like Jake Long get signed weeks ago, and that kind of kills the first pick of the draft. But as someone on the outside, as a fan, as an analyst, it's fun. But when you see these reports about John Dorsey having this locked up for 6 weeks and Hugh Jackson finding out 2 days ago, and it's funny that the Baker leak started about 2 days ago after he allegedly told Hugh that he was going to pick Baker. So it seems like a little dysfunctional on the interior of the Browns franchise, but that's nothing new. But as a consumer, I like not knowing exactly who's going to be right now.
So who do you think the pick should be? If they were asking you, if you were in Scott McCloughan's place and you were the consultant?
I would say Baker, just because, to me, Baker and Lamar are the top two quarterbacks in the draft. And if you're going to look at just those two guys, from my point of view, I like Lamar a lot. But I think if you're going to look at someone who needs to be the new face of a 1-31 program, I think Baker might be a little bit better equipped to handle that right now. And he'd probably be someone that can get the fan base excited, and you're going to get at least like a baseline level of play. So I would go with Baker, but I like Lamar a lot too.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the other big reveals. Just jumping ahead as we have this cliffhanger, New England heavily associated with Lamar Jackson. 2 visits apparently. New Orleans heavily associated with Lamar Jackson, and we get Ian Rappaport saying today that they are ready to trade up for Lamar Jackson. And maybe when we look back on this first round, the biggest plate tectonic shift, and this is an incredible time. I think everyone's even felt it for the last 24 hours. I was describing it earlier today as going through a wormhole, because there's all of these alternate realities. Teams and players' destinies and fates are hanging in the balance. And we always like to look back at past drafts and say, if, and these ifs become reality. But we may look back as the biggest plate tectonic shift in this draft is where Lamar Jackson goes, especially with the direction the league is headed. Now, while we're waiting, as the draft is about to get underway, we won't have you, Charles. You do great work at Football Outsiders. You do great work at the Falcoholic. Jump us ahead to Atlanta's pick. And there was some talk, I think, that they like Daron Payne so much that they may even try to move up for him. When I was looking at Tony Pauline's final mock draft, it sure feels like a Dan Quinn style player would be Taven Bryan or Daron Payne. Is that where you're zeroed in on the Falcons pick?
Yeah, I still think it's going to be it's going to be Taven Bryan over Daron Payne. Just when you look at some like the public comments that Dan Quinn has made this offseason, he's said that he's looking for more of those penetrator types. And when you look at Payne's production in college, he only had 5 career tackles for losses, which is, when you're looking at someone who you're going to give up draft capital for and pay a sizable contract to, that's a pretty big projection. But Payne's a decent player. I think that part of the reason he's going to end up in the first round is just because there aren't a lot of standout defensive tackles this year. But I think Taven Bryan seems more like their guy, just like a freakish athlete who had some production in Florida. He's not a finished product at all, but just when you look at Vic Beasley, Tack McKinley, Grady Jarrett, they've had a pretty good this regime at least has had a pretty good track record with developing defensive linemen. So I think that a guy like Taven Bryan is going to be who they pick.
And on to Daron Payne, Stephen White. I love what Stephen White contributes to our community as a former player, his unabashed, unfiltered takes. He really felt like Payne's, and you've brought up before on Twitter about the lack of production, but he really felt like it was a function of the role at Alabama and not the player. What do you think about that as we look ahead to Payne and his projection in the pros?
Yeah, I did think about that some, but when you look at guys who have played right before Payne, Alabama a couple of years ago, they had two defensive tackles with Jerron Reed and A'Shawn Robinson, both become, I think they're both round 2 draft picks, fairly high. But those are two guys that had way more production than Daron Payne did. Just looking at the stats here, A'Shawn Robinson, he had, 7.5 tackles for losses his last season, which is more than Payne had in 3 years at Alabama. So I'm not really sure that the role is a big deal, is the reason why. I just think he's just not a very refined player yet. And that makes sense. He's only 20 years old. So I get it when you see the frame and the age and the athleticism. He's a guy that's going to go high. I just think that he's not as ready as people are selling him to be.
As we wait on this pick, and I love, by the way, our Twitter community, Ryan Burns, we all love football sickness, said that he's getting a bad feeling about this. It really is. I suppose it really is perfect for all the Browns fans out there at this draft. It's going to culminate the new beginning for the franchise to have to go.
They've been training. As I showed on Twitter,
I love the training was perfect, taking those shots to the crotch. As we're waiting,
the groin. There we go.
Yeah, and it's impossible really to try to put together thoughts as we're waiting for this to kick it off, because unlike other drafts, we don't know what the number 1 pick is, and unlike other drafts, the identity of the number 1 pick is going to set in motion scenarios that we are going to have to contemplate on the fly here. If it's not Darnold, do the Giants take Darnold? Then does someone trade up to number 2 for Darnold? Is it Denver? That makes so much sense for the Giants to do that. But before we delve into that, because once it gets kicked off, the slots are going to be flying at warp speed. Charles, give us, in your eye, a couple of your guys from this first round, players that you're going to be on the edge of your seat wondering where they're going to land.
Well, first of all, a guy that probably won't go today, Maurice Hurst, defensive lineman from Michigan. I was so bummed because I feel like every year, we kind of get guys that we end up rooting for throughout their careers. And for me, Maurice Hurst is definitely that guy. And when he got flagged with the heart thing at the combine, it was a bummer. But I doubt he's going to go today. There's been some late buzz with him and the Falcons at 26, but I'm just not sure if they'd be the team to take that risk, considering his heart issue. And obviously, we don't have all the information on that, so it's just going to be a team-by-team basis. But he's going to be a guy I look for today and tomorrow. Today, Isaiah Oliver from Colorado, really long cornerback prospect, really athletic, really young. He kind of just looks like these guys at the NFL covets, like Richard Seaman, Richard Sherman, guys like that. And another guy that kind of has gotten not late buzz, but some late buzz saying that he could go really high is Marcus Davenport from UTSA, the pass rusher. Just, I remember Justice and I, we were watching him before Senior Bowl practice started in Mobile. We were just watching together, and I was like, this guy kind of reminds me of Tack McKinley a little bit. Just when you look at him, he's obviously ridiculous athlete. You see the hustle, you see the burst, but it's just doesn't always click for him on the field. But we saw what Tack could do last year in his rookie year. Sometimes you just say, cut him loose and say, go get him. And those guys end up doing all right. And he's just a guy, when you see the athleticism and the hustle, those are two things that are going to allow you to make plays right out the gate as a rookie. So I like him a lot.
Yeah, I like Davenport too. I liked him more than I thought. And again, Stephen White, his breakdown pointed out some things about his pass rush repertoire that fit in the NFL, even though the book on him is, he doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have a lot of counter moves. And his pad level is high, and he is going to have to get coached up. But the raw materials, and at a position that arguably is the second most important position behind quarterback.
Hey, Bloom, a Steeler just intercepted a Roger Staubach pass that took off the NFL draft.
They are in Arlington. It is in Dallas's stadium, and there's everyone will get to watch me hand ring. As long as they don't take Mason Rudolph, I'll be happy with the Steelers pick. And the edge class here is interesting because you got Harold Landry, and I hope we may see a visitor to you from Dr. Gene tonight. Speaking of Maurice Hurst and his heart issue, Harold Landry, his knee issue. And Landry is clearly the most natural edge rusher, even more so than Bradley Chubb, who we're surely going to see go in the top 6. There's one scenario I think that's emerging where Indy could get Chubb even after they traded down. And then we may see, of course, surprise late first-round picks, guys like Lorenzo Carter from Georgia, Josh Sweat from Florida State, because that edge position is so coveted. And really, at this point, I'm just trying to fill air because I want to know what's going to happen at number 1. Matt, what as to all the, because you have this Cleveland connection, it's in your blood, to all the fellow Cleveland fans, how much are you feeling part of that community right now as the mass mind is focused on this?
Well, I think there's a lot of trepidation, and it's so split up, and you would see that in any kind of community that's kind of downtrodden, is that there's going to be factions and they're going to bicker with each other and they're going to have different views. I mean, there's going to be a Mayfield faction, there's going to be a Darnold faction, and there's going to be I wish both those guys, I'm a part of that faction. I want Josh Rosen. But I know that that's probably wanting the impossible. But I think that honestly, he's the best leader for this particular group because there's so much uncertainty that he's the guy that's going to outlast everybody, as we talked about before. And he's the most technically sound. So he'll be the one that will be able to catch this capricious owner's eye early enough so that, that basically if you're looking at the political game, he's going to look at Rosen and go, I need to listen to this kid a little bit for input about some of the things that we're going to do in this front office, or at least on a level where, if the kid plays well enough early. And I think he'll show that kind of promise. But I mean, you look at the Browns right now, and I don't think we really have a clue of what's happening. Maybe the big media is right and it will be Baker Mayfield, and at the same time, all of this is just hope. Browns fans, for year after year after year, you watch this and they have all the hope in the world for whatever player it is. It was Deshaun Kaiser at the beginning of last year. And then, you would have thought he was a bum by the end of the year. So it's just one of those situations where the fans are a mess and they need to be, what they need to see is some proof of something working. And until that happens, they're basically drowning fans reaching for a life raft. And, and I feel bad for them in that regard because I understand how that feels, but it's a situation of desperation right now. So, they don't know who to trust and they don't know what that situation is really going to be about at this stage. And they're going to cling on to the hopes and the most positive things about every player. And then there's a faction that's going to basically crap on every possible selection until they show that they've gotten it right. So, this is just the introduction to the newest regime of among many that have not gotten it right thus far when you look at the bottom line. And unfortunately, the biggest problem, Bloom, is that what we've seen year after year is that if you're going to have a new process, if you're going to go analytics like they did, they need to give it at least 3 years. They need to give it at least more than that, really, to be honest with you, to try and get it right. But the fact that they went back to a broken process that's been around since the 1950s that hasn't changed much and still used some analytics with it, what's going on here is they might as well just be throwing darts at this point about what they're doing. And until they've proven 2 to 3 years from now that they've gotten it right, they're going to continue to get questioned. And that's how fans feel.
Yeah, and so you talk about this idea that, the draft is a crapshoot or something like that. So, Charles, you said that you have Mayfield and Jackson at the top of your board. And Matt, you broke out how, there's some that want Rosen, some that want Darnold, some that want Mayfield. The one place where everybody seems to be able to agree is they don't want Josh Allen. Charles, what did you think of Josh Allen when you evaluated him?
It's funny because I feel like I was kind of on the Josh Allen bandwagon a little bit late, just in terms of evaluating him. And I feel like when Twitter takes hold of a new prospect, they tend to go in like pretty extreme areas. Either, he's the GOAT, he's John Elway, or why is this guy even touching a football? But I thought going into watching Josh Allen that it was going to be somewhere in the middle, but I found myself pretty much agreeing with everyone who said he was as bad as he said he was. I just don't know where the place in the league for him is, like, or for any quarterback that just can't thrive really under pressure at all. And, when you're in the NFL, you're going to see a lot of situations where the defensive line talent is just better, straight up better than the offensive line talent. And we're going to see that today as we see a lot of defensive linemen go in the first round, and only one offensive tackle, probably, maybe two with Colton Miller and Mike McGlinchey. I just don't really know if I don't really know if you can fix those problems. And obviously the physical tools are tantalizing. I mean, if you just took his best throws, he's the obvious number one pick in the draft, but there's just so many lowlights that I can't really get them out of my head with him. Like, I would feel cool with taking him even in round 3, but just at this position where you got to take him and tie your job security to him, I couldn't do it.
I understand, and we may see him. It feels like if Mayfield goes number 1, that may set in motion scenarios where maybe he falls to Buffalo's natural, well, not natural because they traded up for it, but the pick they're sitting at right now. Although I would say, and I'm not going to, as we're waiting, I'm really just waiting to see the pick, and then we're going to have a lot of amazing stuff to talk about. That I saw Josh Rosen also have problems with pressure. I saw Baker Mayfield in the pocket have problems detecting and reacting to pressure. And what I saw of Josh Allen, there were times that he was pressing and overwhelmed, trying to do way too much. And then there were times that he could elude pressure and create a play, like you said, Charles, that only he could make. We're down to 3:30 on the clock. And what's really funny to me about this is not only are they keeping us suspense, they're going to use the whole 10 minutes because that's just what John Dorsey is going to do. Let's jump ahead real quick and talk about that number 4 pick, which Michael Lombardi has already put out there that the Browns are going to trade down, but not trade down until they're on the clock. But the name, Charles, that's been associated with that pick a lot is either Saquon Barkley or Bradley Chubb. But what Saquon Barkley brings up is a conversation about positional value and high first-round picks. Do you think that should dissuade a team like the Browns or the Giants from taking Barkley, or do you think Barkley is so good he makes that conversation null and void?
I wouldn't take Barkley at 4. I mean, I think there are better backs in this draft than Barkley in the first place. And I know Waldman's with me on that one. So, I think if you're Cleveland and, it's cool to trade down every year and accumulate picks, but you have an opportunity right now to add 2 elite players to your roster. And when you just think about, we always talk about, or what we did talk about this draft season is Bradley Chubb as good as Myles Garrett? Is Bradley Chubb really the caliber of prospect? Well, how about you just put them right across for each other and we can see who's better? And that's going to be a lot of fun for the Browns. And even if you think about the pairing of Garrett and Chubb, don't forget about Emmanuel Ogbah, who was one of the best run defenders in the league last year before he got hurt late in the season. So now you're talking about a situation where you can put Myles Garrett, Emmanuel Ogbah, Bradley Chubb on the field, and you have a 3-tech like Larry Ogunjobi, who was a stud last year. That's a lot of speed up front, and that's difficult to handle in second and third and long situations. So I think you sit there. I think you just take this chance to add an elite defensive end like Bradley Chubb to your roster and go knock some heads come the fall.
Yeah, and I think that pick for the Browns has gained momentum, maybe even more than trading down. And I agree with you about you only amass picks for so long before it's time to flip the switch and say it's time to win. The pick is in, and we'll have some fascinating things to talk about for sure. But go
at the same time, if you're at 4, and let's say the Bills and the Cardinals are offering you their 2019 first, those are 2 teams that are probably gonna be pretty bad next year. I don't know. That also becomes hard to turn away too at the same time.
Well, and the Bills have the number 12 pick, and if you assume 4 quarterbacks in the top 12, there are by most accounts 8 elite non-quarterbacks in this draft. So if you trade down to 12 and you can still get a Derwin James or a Minkah Fitzpatrick or a Denzel Ward for that secondary, that makes a lot of sense. But here comes Roger Goodell, and we'll get this thing kicked off. My TV's muted, so he may say it before.
Baker Mayfield.
And there it is. Baker Mayfield. After all that. And I think we can say now in hindsight that absolutely there was a misinformation campaign. And I forget who it was that said at one point that if the teams just put all the energy into focusing on evaluation and team building and not subterfuge, then they would probably be better off. But obviously there was a lot of subterfuge. Even I think it was Chris Mortensen who was the one that put out there that it was down to Darnold or Allen. Like Cecil's here with us. He's in Arlington, but he's always with us in our hearts. Charles, Baker Mayfield, the Brown, react to me.
I like it. I think what I'm really interested to see, just thinking about this already, is, Todd Haley, he's been with Ben Roethlisberger these past few years. And now you have a quarterback who physically is just not anything like Ben Roethlisberger. He's a shorter quarterback. I don't think he can dominate the deep game like Ben Roethlisberger does, but that's fine because he can really work the shorter and intermediate levels of the field really, really well, I think. And just when you look at where the NFL is going, if you just look at the average depth of passing targets from 2013 to 2017, like it's dropping every year. So, teams, they're kind of bringing the passing game within a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage. You're playing faster, you're using more RPOs. And if you want a quarterback that did that at arguably the highest level in college football history, this is your guy.
And when Haley was with the Steelers, the big change that he made in Ben Roethlisberger's game is that I actually compared Allen to Roethlisberger, not necessarily in a good way, that early in his career, Roethlisberger either was more comfortable engaging the defense outside of the pocket, or when he was in the pocket, he didn't have a natural clock and would often hold the ball too long. And he got him to take what the defense would give him. And that's what Baker Mayfield is excellent at. And that's where I think that Baker Mayfield shines, is taking the play from the whiteboard to the field and in the true concept and executing it in a way that and this is what Jared Goff did last year, is letting the offensive coordinator get you halfway there, like Lincoln Riley did for him. But Matt, that's not all there is. And you've been hey, I want to say right now too that draft Twitter should be happy, because Baker Mayfield, many in draft Twitter passionately have said is the best quarterback in this draft, against what traditional NFL thinking would say he is not a number one overall pick. He is not a number one quarterback in the draft. And the Browns came to that conclusion. But Matt, you've been saying, even when people were pounding the table and saying he's the best quarterback in the draft, there are flaws.
Yeah.
What flaws did you see, Matt?
Yeah, he's not the best quarterback in this class, in my opinion. But there's certainly guys, I can understand the argument for it. He may be the best quarterback for the AFC North, since none of the cornerbacks in the AFC North's defenses play man-to-man very well. So the fact that they're going to be playing a lot of zone defense fits very well in terms of what Baker Mayfield does well, because what these offenses are designed to do is to exploit zone defenses. So, it's going to be a lot of quick action. Hopefully, if they get everything aligned, there'll be a lot of quick action, a lot of bells and whistles. They're going to Deshaun Watson him in a lot of ways, which I think is very positive. And Deshaun Watson is an excellent quarterback. I think that Baker Mayfield is capable of being a good starter in this league. So if you're going to fit it towards what the NFC North is about, it works pretty well in terms of how his matchups go. But the issue is how does he handle tight man coverage? How does he handle edge pressure that bookends him into the pocket and forces him to stay in there and maneuver and really deliver with the type of ball placement that's important? Because even though the stat guys on draft Twitter will talk about how great his accuracy percentage is, we know that there is a great deal of variation in charting, and that variation can be problematic. There's also, when you start breaking it down and you look at his games where he's had to deal with tight man coverage, it hasn't been great. There's a lot of routes that do work off the post, and there's a lot of things that work off being able to throw a deep post. And if your game's incomplete and you're not able to throw that deep post, you're not able to set up a number of different things that go with that. So, when I look at Baker Mayfield's game, I think has a chance to be a productive NFL starter. I think that he can be a good NFL starter, but to me, it is going to be system dependent. The good thing is that, as Charles mentioned, Todd Haley is someone that is, he's worked with Ben Roethlisberger. He's been known to be able to adjust to his players, and he's someone that does use a fair amount of different work in the ground game in terms of being able to use a variety of run formations and different types of run blocking usage. So yeah, everyone's reacting to Saquon Barkley going number 2. We'll talk about him in a minute. And a quick pick too,
and a sprint up to the podium, basically. Go ahead and finish.
Sorry. But when you look at Mayfield, I think that he's someone who To me, saying that he's Russell Wilson is really the data guys who missed on Russell Wilson want their Russell Wilson, and they're not going to get him here. They're not going to get their Drew Brees looking here. But I do think they're going to get a good, productive quarterback, and the Browns could have done a lot worse. So I'm not down on that. But as far as Saquon Barkley is concerned, I love this in theory, because if you could, if you're going to spread this out and use a little bit more of the Andy Reid type of concepts that Shermer uses, and was influenced by Andy Reid, you're going to get him out in space more. Maybe you can do a little bit more spread work with their future quarterback in a year or two. And this might work out really well as kind of your space player. And so I like it in theory when you look at all the different skill positions that they have, but is it going to be timed up right with what they actually have? And he still needs an offensive line, because this is a guy who bounces everything outside. He isn't very good at being able to work between the tackles on as consistent of the basis as he should. And he could develop that. I think he will. He's got very good pad level when he needs it. He doesn't break a lot of arm tackles. You're going to see that on occasion in some of these highlights here. But when you look at his game week by week by week, he doesn't break as many arm tackles. He's much more of a receiver, and he can give you that kind of Marshall Faulk component. And maybe if he grows into being a between the tackles guy, it gives you that Fred Taylor component. So it's a great pick on a talent level basis. But in terms of how it fits with the team and where you play the draft, as I'm sure we're going to hear in a moment here from our buds, that it may not be as strong as it should be.
No, and they don't take Sam Darnold. And Jordan Rannon said way back, they were only interested in Darnold, and it ended up they weren't even interested in Darnold.
I think they're gonna. I'll just interrupt one thing.
Yeah.
At the end of this round, expect a trade, and expect them to trade up into it. And I'll tell you who mentioned that. Yes.
Okay.
And with whom too?
Go ahead.
Maybe with the Eagles.
Well, yeah, and the Eagles trading at number 32 seems like and you think to get a quarterback?
Yes, and I know, and I think it will be Rudolph if he's there.
Rudolph.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Mason Rudolph fits with a pass, spread out the field and pass. Go ahead, Charles. Take the floor.
Man. Okay. So I guess with that news that they're going to try and trade up for Mason Rudolph if he's there late towards the end of this round, that makes a Saquon pick a little bit better. But I just think when you look back, we're going to look back at this class. Saquon may have had the flashiest career, but you're going to see a lot of guys that produce close to he did, and you don't have to get this amount of you don't have to pay this draft pick for him. I think when you look at the Giants and you just look at where they're deficient, and they just shipped off their best pass rusher to Tampa Bay, right? So you have a chance to add a blue chip pass rusher across from Olivier Vernon, who's been a massive disappointment as like a $90 million pass rusher they signed a few years
Thanks,
ago.
Uncle Chaps, by the way.
Yeah. I just thought that if you're not going to go quarterback, then Bradley Chubb probably would have made the most sense here. But let's be real, an offense with Saquon, Evan Ingram, Odell Beckham, that's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Sterling Shepard. Yeah, and I think that hopefully they commit, and there's an assumption of rational coaching here that they really spread out the field. And Barkley, I think, offers more as a pass blocker and a route runner and a receiver than he does as a runner. And as Matt pointed out, there are flaws. And you see him get overwhelmed sometimes by defensive backs when they're tackling him. He doesn't win collisions. He doesn't just stick his nose in there and push the pile and take on the conflict or the confrontation when it's there. He wants to avoid it. And I think there are some holes in his game. And since you mentioned it, Charles, you don't think he's the best running back in the class. Who do you think it is?
I really like Darius Guice from LSU. I think he's really good. And I think guys like Nick Chubb and Sony Michel are right as on his tier. So, if I can get one of those guys on day 2, like where it looks like you can get Nick Chubb and Sony Michel, I'm feeling a lot better than picking Saquon at 2 and missing out on a guy like Bradley Chubb when I really need pass rush help.
Yeah, you can never have enough pass rush. The Giants were the ones who originally showed us that way. You can never have enough pass rush.
And fans, though, will look at this, though, and say, if they picked up a Chubb or a Geis and those guys didn't perform well with the offensive line, we would have heard fans complain about Barkley falling to a team that actually had a good offensive line and put him in space, and he did all these great things, and they would have said, "See, I told you," when really the truth of it is exactly what Charles said.
It's going to be fun. And we may not see another running back pick tonight, although Darius Geis has been linked to the Eagles. He may be the pick at 32, but maybe not to the Eagles.
Linked to the Eagles too at 32 as well.
Mm-hmm. Michelle,
yeah.
And Michelle, there's this late thing about bone on bone, and we saw that drop Jay Ajayi from, say, a second or third round pick to a fifth round pick. It hasn't hampered his career yet. The Jets pick is in. Matt, there was a thing a few weeks ago, and I always say teams tell the truth when they're using even their visits. And the Jets hadn't had Sam Darnold in for a visit because they didn't contemplate he would be there. And then they had him in for a visit. Do you think that, and even I think it was Ralph Bacchiano said, if it's Darnold, if it's Rosen, we're not sure. What do we think is going to happen here when they announce this pick?
I think it's going to be Darnold. I think that, you look at this, you just look at the history of this organization, and they're a bit of a reactive organization as a whole. And I think that this is one of those, we didn't think he'd fall to us and they'd be overjoyed, and they might overcome a little bit of their research and looking at the player. And Darnold's not a bad pick. He's kind of that, I kind of joke that he's like that spicy mayonnaise pick for a lot of these teams, which, a lot of these teams like mayonnaise. So, he's not a bad player, but he's a bit of a projection. And he fits a lot of the incomplete ways that teams evaluate quarterbacking. So it would be fairly exciting. I would love for them to take Rosen. I think that would be, again, as I said, I think he's the best quarterback in this class, and he's falling for just stupid ass reasons. But yeah, we're going to see in a minute here.
Probably Darnold, I think.
Well, yeah, Darnold's the defensible pick. Rosen's the one that meshes much better with what Jeremy Bates does. Let's see.
Yeah. There you go. And when you look at this, offensive setup, again, this is a type of team that you would have thought Baker Mayfield would have been a nice setup for too, because of the fact that they have that kind of power spread type of thing that Bates wanted to do. And you get a lot of that bells and whistle movement, but you can do some of that with Darnold too, because he's a physical player. He's just not as, he's not quite as disciplined with his footwork as Mayfield is. But at the same time, he does a lot of off-platform work that's very positive, and he can be an aggressive player sometimes to a fault. But sometimes some people are going to look at this and go, "Oh, Mark Sanchez all over again."
Well, what do you think, Charles? Darnold to the Jets. You didn't mention him as one of your top two quarterbacks. What do you think of this pick?
Darnold's a guy that I didn't really like at first, but I went back and watched him after the season. I've kind of warmed up to him. Obviously, he can make every single throw that you want him to, and I think he works really well in the short and quick game, which is important. And what's funny about Darnold is he gets a lot of flack for his release, but I don't think his release really hinders his game at all. Like, even though it looks wonky, it's still getting out fast. So I really wouldn't be too concerned with that as a critique of him. I just think for him, it's just going to be, when are you going to stop making the knucklehead plays and just go out there and be good? Like we all know that you can be. And I don't know if he's going to play this year, because they're probably going to have Josh McCown and Teddy Bridgewater battle for that spot. But, the sky's the limit for him. I know some people whose metrics really like him. So, this is a pretty good pick. And I think he's like the youngest quarterback prospect too. So
I want to say like the first 20-year-old quarterback to be taken this high, which makes sense when you think about the knucklehead plays or not taking care of the ball. And as Matt and I have talked about, I forget who it was that wrote about magical sloppiness, but you see him be able to get flushed, regroup, and think big and convert big. And that makes sense with the Jets. You don't think of offensive line and pass protection when you think of the Jets right now. And that might be to give Darnold a little better start over Rosen. And I suppose when the Jets moved up, and let's step back and talk about how the Jets moved up from 6-3 months before the draft. And this isn't a case like we know who's going to go number one, and we're going to get RG3 number two, or we're going to get Wentz number two. This is a case where there was a lot of uncertainty, and some thought they're moving up for a quarterback that they felt reasonably certain would be there. That's probably Baker Mayfield. Either way, if you would have said they would have had a chance to take Sam Darnold at that time, you would have said that pick was a win, and they didn't have to give up a first-round pick to do it. Matt, really quick, Teddy Bridgewater, there was some talk, Dan Graziano wrote a piece today about players that could be traded during the draft. Teddy Bridgewater, one of them, because now they have Sam Darnold could be the backup to McCown. What do we think about, I said Jacksonville or Cincinnati, who don't have a good backup right now and maybe don't have a great starter either. If you could pick a destination for Teddy, Who would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cincinnati would be nice. I think that while we don't know him for his deep arm, certainly Arizona could be nice, especially with their existing talent base that they have right now. That might not be a bad look. And really, I mean, I still think the two best quarterbacks are on the board still. And when you look at this situation, with Darnold, I mean, I kind of laugh about this because you look at the tape, and as Charles said, and you look at what he does. I always joke around, call this get her done mechanics, kind of by Brett Favre. And if there's a guy that I think maybe Scott McCloughan's had some late nights, and he mistook the Baker Mayfield tape with the Sam Darnold tape when he made the comparison of Brett Favre, or he's looking, a little deeper, obviously, probably in terms of some of the things that he's talking about, maybe from a processing standpoint. But when you look at this overall, yeah, I mean, those two teams could be nice, and maybe they'll have the luxury of being able to wait until summer if somebody gets hurt or their rehab isn't going quite as well, something along those lines. So that gives them a little bit of an added luxury at this stage of the game. But, Sam Darnold's I think he's the safest, conventional pick. But as we've seen, convention usually is a one step behind winners. So I'm not all that enthused by the first two picks I've seen thus far. I'm a little more hopeful for the Browns than I am for the Jets.
Yeah, I think the defensible in the media, safe, as you said, that doesn't always pan.
Fine. They're fine, but I'm not these guys are the example of the NFL's thinking. The two most talented players mentally and physically and technically are still on the board at the quarterback position. And it just tells you the state of the NFL is still rooted in 1959.
Yep, we got Josh Rosen and Lamar Jackson still on the board. I think some teams are going to be pretty happy here in the next hour or so.
I would be. I can't imagine that there aren't some teams like clamoring right now to try and trade up.
Right, because just think about if the Browns don't trade this pick. Just think about where this draft goes. You go Denver, and it looks like John Elway has probably scared himself out of drafting a quarterback with all the misses he's had. You go to Indianapolis, who's not going to be in the business of a quarterback. So now that price of the quarterback just gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So if you're a team and Lamar Jackson or Josh Rosen sitting there at like 10 and you're the Raiders, that'd be a good spot to trade down. Or it's just looking like if you want to get Josh Rosen or Lamar Jackson, you might not have to pay as much you were going to have to.
Yeah.
And now the Browns pick is in, so he's about to fall a little bit more.
And then while we're talking about that, I mean, look at the fact that we've had analysts talking about the upside of Bryce Petty and Christian Hackenberg. I mean, think about that, and they're on the same team. And so when I look at this and I look at the upside down nature of how these players are being picked, I mean, my first four were Rosen, Lamar Jackson, Darnold, and Baker Mayfield. And that's no slight against the last two guys, really, because I think they could be competent starters in the NFL and even very productive. But when you're just looking at overall talent, it just tells you about how we can overanalyze certain aspects of it. And maybe, I've been wrong many times before. So, my opinionated idea about who the best ones are, maybe we're splitting hairs here at this stage. But, at the same time, it's funky how this works. Bloom, I mean, who do you think this is? Is this going to be Chubb?
It should got to be Chubb. And I mean, if it's not Chubb, something went wrong.
They're an option here because they really do.
Ward. I'm sorry. Did you say Ward, Charles?
Yeah, Denzel Ward, maybe.
Yeah. And that's the other one that would make sense because that's their biggest deficiency. And I do think you mentioned Isaiah Oliver. Whether it's him or Jair Alexander or Josh Jackson. There's a lot of other first round corners, but I have Ward above and beyond in that.
Hey, there we go.
There you go.
Good job, Denzel Ward. Well, and it makes sense from a positional need because when Ogba and Garrett were on the field together last year, it looked good. This could be, by the way, a dream scenario for Indy because I think Indy absolutely takes Bradley Chubb if they stay home at number 3, and Denver doesn't need him. Now, maybe someone would trade up for Chubb, but I doubt it because you're going to have to pay quarterback prices to move up right now. So Indy might have really won the draft in a certain way by trading down, adding 3 second-round picks, and getting the player they would have taken anyway. Something that the Giants didn't really consider doing?
Can I have a fanboy moment for just a moment?
Please.
As a kind of a Browns fan here, I would love nothing more than the Broncos to take Josh Allen. I would just absolutely love this. I want John Elway to base his job on this. I would absolutely love it. Just as a fan who, fantasizes about sacking John Elway, I would love to see him, in this particular situation. As a professional, I don't really care either way. But yeah, just the little compartment in me that hates the Broncos, I would love to see Josh Allen go right here.
And he's in the region there, like just a border away, the north rectangle to south rectangle.
They're saying, I guess the Browns, they might not be done today because there was some buzz earlier that the Seahawks are trying to get some more picks. So
yeah. And
so
go ahead.
What do you think schematically about having Ward there in that particular situation? Why is he such a good fit? And will that stop Greg Williams from playing their cornerbacks, 50 yards off the line of scrimmage?
I don't know if it's going to, if anything about that, because he just seems to be lost. Just lost in the sauce there. But I just think that he's really good in man coverage. And if you're going to be a team that's going to blitz as often as they are, you really need to have some corners that can play behind. I mean, just when you look at what the Jets were able to do back in the mid-2000s with Revis and Cromartie, that scheme doesn't work if you don't have corners that can strap up on the outside. And just when we look at the Browns roster, they didn't really have anyone capable of doing that. And I love what our pal Kyle Posey wrote in his top 50 big board yesterday at Baltimore Blue. He wrote that Denzel Ward is quicker than fast, and he ran a 4.32 40. So what is that? Yeah.
And I think he might have called him a nuisance too. I might be mixing up my big boards, but that was a word that I like to describe Denzel Ward. And I think it was Jonah Talls who compared him to Casey Hayward. I think if you're looking for a cornerback to roughly think of what Ward can do.
So he's new school Frank Minifield.
Yeah. And hey, you're in a division with Antonio Brown, with AJ Green,
Michael Crabtree now.
Michael Crabtree. Yeah, well,
hey, you can run a route.
Yeah, so it makes sense from a need standpoint, and it also makes sense from a tier standpoint where I don't think any of the other corners in this class, maybe there's some that you'd move up a little bit depending on what you ask from your corners, but I think Ward was the clear number one corner, and I understand that. I think Chubb would have been a defensible pick. But now you have Denver, and what's really fascinating, and I like how you set it up, Matt, this idea of whether it's Josh Allen or Josh Rosen, staking maybe not his career, because John Elway might just be like, what was it? The Prime Minister of China just made himself unable to be removed from office.
Nowhere.
Yeah,
he owns Denver.
Yeah, he does. But Denver won a Super Bowl not that long ago with one foot in the grave, Peyton Manning. They still have a lot of the core of that team on defense, at least, and they're still in a window where they could win. But if they take a quarterback here, they're basically saying that they're looking to the future. Even though they signed Case Keenum, I guess you take a Quenton Nelson. Maybe you just don't even contemplate that Bradley Chubb's going to be there, and you take him anyway because you don't pass that up. So there is a real fork in the road now in this first round. Charles, if you were given the steering wheel, where would you steer it for the Broncos?
Here I would probably take Josh Rosen here. But like I said earlier, if you're John Elway and the picks that you've made are Brock Osweiler and Paxton Lynch, I don't know how much you trust yourself to make this pick right now and have it be a quarterback, which is probably why they jumped into that free agent market for Case Keenum. But if I'm not going to go quarterback, I think I would go with Bradley Chubb and try to solidify the other side of Von Miller. So now you got Von Miller, Bradley Chubb as your bookends, and that gives you a chance to have guys like Shaq Barrett and Shane Ray come off the bench and be your edge guys.
What would be nice about picking Josh Rosen is it would go against the NFL tendency to actually just kind of be at the bare minimum with quarterbacks to develop, and they need to have more quarterbacks that they can develop on a roster and to pay more attention to doing that. So it would be nice to have a guy like Rosen in that room to compete with some other guys, and especially have Case Keenum as a guy who's been through a number of different teams and has seen things, been there, done that, to be kind of a mentor in a certain respect. And I think Keenum knows, while he'd love to be the guy, I think he knows where his place is in the NFL, and he'll always kind of fight for a little more than that, but know that, he's there also to help out. So I would love, just as an analyst, I'd love to see Josh Rosen here. I think it would be a great fit, but we're going to find out.
Yeah, and when the message we're getting, Ian Rappaport saying too, the Bills don't want to give up 2 first-round picks to move up. The Browns and the Broncos both open to trading down. It's not happening. Either whether it's the quarterbacks, the quality of the quarterbacks, they're not worth it to the Bills, to the Cardinals. The suspense. I
know, right? And I know that we've heard Cecil say they may cut Chad Kelly, but that's another guy I know that our next guest also down the line is a fan of, as well as myself. So we'll see if they pick a quarterback in the next couple of rounds here and then cut Chad Kelly loose. Though they should be cutting Paxton Lynch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
And I think, based on this pick, we should be able to project the next pick pretty easily, and then we'll go from there. So we find out the Broncos pick here.
Chubb.
There you go.
And it is Bradley Chubb.
Love it.
Yep, it's a great pick.
Well, the Colts, and I think and all indications are to the Colts going Roquan Smith. But Charles, you had a reaction to that, like a release, and this is a player I think that Denver didn't contemplate being able to get, but they did, and you think it's a good thing. Why?
Well, one, it was so much fun just going back. Like, if you just have a chance to go back and watch some of that 2015 Broncos defense, it's really fun to watch. And what was really fun about it was, we all knew Von Miller was great, but they finally got a guy like DeMarcus Ware in there to be kind of like, I don't even want to say it, Robin to his Batman, because that's kind of selling DeMarcus Ware short. But when you have 2 pass rushers that can take over a game, it's just such it's just almost unstoppable. So, and
it's a Captain America to Iron Man.
Right, exactly. And I'm just a guy who loves defensive line play, and I just think like the aesthetic of having a guy like Von Miller who's just straight speed and bend on one side, and then you got the power guy with Bradley Chubb on the other side. And, he's a freak athlete in his own right. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I think that this is a pick that's going to make their secondary a lot better too. And, with Aqib Talib leaving and Chris Harris getting a little bit older, that's going to be needed too.
Yeah, they've got Shane Ray, in some ways. I don't know if this is necessarily admitting that the Shane Ray pick didn't work out, but it hasn't really worked out. I think they had Shaq Barrett occasionally applying pressure, but not making the kinds of plays that you saw from DeMarcus Ware. And I think this is, whether it's we didn't expect him to be there and we have to take him, or we're still trying to win now, not taking the quarterback again. And it's interesting because I think a lot of talk leading up to the draft is, when you have a chance to take a quarterback, you should take the quarterback if you evaluate him and he's above the line. And I can't help but think that when these teams looked at Josh Allen and looked at Josh Rosen for whatever reason, and only time will tell if they were right, they did. And the Colts sprint up to the podium, and all of the talk has been Roquan Smith. Charles, is that a reach?
No, I think Roquan's the best player in the draft. So just when you look at where the Colts have been on defense recently, they don't really have any speed in the linebacking group. And I think you can argue maybe that you don't want to be picking an inside linebacker this high, but I just think that you have someone like Roquan Smith. That's a guy that changes the face of your defense. The middle of your defense, if the middle of your defense is slow, you have a slow defense, and that's where the Colts have always been. Now it looks like they have Roquan Smith. That's going to make their run defense better. It's going to make their pass coverage better. It's going to make their blitzing better. So, I think this is a home run pick for them.
Yeah, and we'll see whether that late buzz was real. It wasn't just late buzz. I think that Tony Pauline said a few weeks ago that if Chubb wasn't there, that Smith was the pick. And I agree with what you said. And sometimes we have to look past pure production or the salary cap numbers by percentage across the league at a position and look at what a player can add. And I suppose this is the argument for Barkley if you want to make the argument for Barkley, but I don't think Barkley's a tone setter the way that Roquan Smith is. And watching linebackers year after year, you just see a player that in addition to his tools, the game speaks to him. He always seems...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
There are 3 teams that can run in this division, and also a team that is going to want to try and move that linebacker out of place in terms of the Houston Texans and want to do a lot of misdirection. So you want someone who's going to be able to handle, stretching the field as well as being able to get downhill and thump when needed. And so I think that, this makes total sense in terms of, as Carl said, addressing the weaknesses of this team. And then when you look at the Broncos back again, we're going to, oh my goodness. So we're going to see guard Quenton Nelson as a result being taken here instead. We'll talk about him in a minute, but back to the Broncos just for a quick second is that, we're going to find out at the end of the first round, whether they trade back in to get a quarterback or they wait and get a Lauletta type or a Rudolph type and see if they're interested in that. But this also is John Elway saying, he's said all along he's believed in Paxton Lynch for one more time.
No.
And it's going to take a couple years. So now they take Quenton Nelson.
Yeah, I love it.
That.
Well, go ahead. And Charles, I think some of the things you said about with the way that Roquan Smith could rehabilitate a slow defense, Quenton Nelson can rehabilitate an offensive line that in some ways got Andrew Luck to the nether regions of football that he's in right now.
You got to protect Andrew Luck. You have such a sizable investment in him that you can't put him back on the field without spending like some serious resources to get him to protect him. So, I guess they missed out on the Andrew Norwell sweepstakes and he ends up going to Jacksonville, but this is a pretty damn good consolation prize. I think literally everyone is on board with Quenton Nelson being an elite prospect, one of the rare guards worth a top 5, top 10 pick. And, he can play in any scheme. So it doesn't really matter what new head coach Frank Reich is going to run. Quenton Nelson, he's going to fit right in. He's going to be a bully for the Colts. And just when you look at across the division, you have the Texans there bringing back J.J. Watt, Davion Clowney, Whitney Merciless. You got the Jaguars, and they can go too deep on the defensive line. So you're just going to need someone that can go toe-to-toe with them, and Quenton Nelson is definitely that guy.
And I like that we've all touched on now the idea that you are in some ways drafting to win your division. You're looking at your opponents in your division. I think that's absolutely something that is in the discussion. And you can defend this pick just as easily as you can defend the Roquan Smith pick. This is that safe, easy pick. And I like the fact that, as you said, guards going this high. I think the league is more open to it now. And I think that we're especially seeing right tackles worth as much as left tackles, and guards almost as worth as much as tackles when teams are building.
Especially with all the interior pressure that's happening with defenses, and then also the way that with spread, the advent of the spread. I mean, more specifically, you're seeing a lot more plays set up where the guards are peeling out to the outside and the tackles are working back to the inside with all this misdirection, and you're setting up the run, and it's all very much more finesse oriented. And because of that, if you can get a good guard who can do a lot of that work for you, that's really helpful. And certainly Andrew Luck has certainly been a mobile guy. And you have, Marlon Mack, if they still stick with Marlon Mack as their starter of the future, and you look at him and what he can do as a big play element, they're going to want to do a lot of misdirection to get Marlon Mack a nice hole for him to hit. He's that guy that is that home run threat. Now we'll see if they added a complement who can deliver right off the bat what they hope Matt can develop into as a between the tackles guy. But it does fit within their scheme very well. And, we think about oftentimes with team building that we try and shore up weaknesses, but sometimes it's really better to play to the strengths of your team and continue to make that weapon almost indefensible. That it can break through any defense, and then you just have a weakness in one area, but your strength make it a super strength as opposed to trying to shore up a weakness. And I think we find that with interviewing candidates in the real world. And I think we find it also as far as with building teams. And I just love this whole little Josh Rosen look here because, I mean,
Intense. I like it though. He doesn't hide his contempt. Look, Rosen in the pre-draft process has been fantastic because he doesn't hide his contempt. He doesn't package himself or manage what he's projecting at all, which I've always said, even though it might cost him a signing bonus amount or a first contract amount, is going to help ensure that he ends up on a team that wants exactly what he has to offer. And as you both have been laying out, especially you, Matt, I think they're going to be happy. And there's the trade for the Bills.
Yep.
Moving
Josh Allen.
Well, so you've got there's Josh Allen, the classic cold weather quarterback, and there's been a lot of talk connecting the team to Allen.
It's a perfect fit.
But then if you look at Nathan Peterman and you think if they liked the attributes of Peterman, who would they like better out of Rosen and Allen? It would be Rosen.
Yeah, but then you'd say, well, maybe that's the problem, is that they saw that, and then the owner said, I want an Allen type, and they're going to have to work with that. And then especially a team that may be very sensitive to its fan base. And when you look at the Buffalo Bills fan base, they tend to have a certain mentality. And I think that Josh Rosen fits that mentality a little bit more of a match. And if you have a team that tends to be responsive or even to the point of reactive to what their fan base is about, then you may wind up with an Allen pick who, hopefully he can work out. There's moments where I think of really strong play where you can see him move in the pocket and throw with touch and climb the pocket and make some good plays. And he certainly does more than sometimes the way people make a caricature of him. But at the same time, I would say that I think that those plays tend to be cherry picked a little bit more, or tend to be in a spot where NFL decision makers could cherry pick that a little too much and not see the overwhelming number of plays where the solution is right in front of his face. He misses it and then compounds his issues. Because, the difference between Josh Rosen and Josh Allen, as you talked about pressure for me, is that when you look at Josh Rosen, he's more the kid trying to say, look, I know everyone knows that I'm cerebral, but I want to show you that I'm tough and that I'm physical and that I can make this play. And he kind of perversely tries to make that third down or close game play across the, with across the body throw that he shouldn't, but he knows better. Josh Allen, to me, I see enough plays in his repertoire where you're looking at the right answer and you're completely ignoring it, like to a level where it shows that you don't know it. And so I'm a little more worried about his reading ability, his intuition, and his understanding of things. And this is the perfect pick. I'm sorry, Bills fans, if you get the fact that I think that this is a perfect pick for them, because I don't think the Bills are in a position to be able to, are in a really, I don't think this is a great pick, but I think this kind of fits the mentality of where the Bills organization was going. And you're now going to get a player who basically does what Tyrod Taylor does, except without the intelligence behind it. So you're actually getting I'll just put it this way. When I looked at all the stuff about Tyrod Taylor last year and the past 2 years and how they characterize him, they were afraid of Lamar Jackson because they thought they were getting Tyrod Taylor. But really, the player that they're getting in Josh Allen is what they think Tyrod Taylor is, when they were completely wrong about Tyrod Taylor. They're getting a caricature of a guy who can move and who makes bad decisions. And so, I mean, it may develop and may get better, but to me, this is almost humorous in the sense that, it's like how else do I put it? Yeah, I'll go there. We don't want the black quarterback who runs and can't make decisions, even though Tyrod Taylor wasn't that player. And that's exactly what you got. He just happens to be white. So there you go.
It just doesn't make sense. And the thing with the Bills trading up for him is, when you look at their roster right now, it's so depleted and devoid of talent. So now you're giving up picks from a depleted roster for a guy who's not ready to play right now and needs a supporting cast to be good. And now you can't go get him that supporting cast that he needs to be good. Maybe they can go get maybe they take a guy like Calvin Ridley or DJ Moore at 22, but this is not an offense that's ready for a rookie quarterback.
Jordan Matthews? Well, he's not even on there anymore, but
they've got Zay Jones, Kelvin Benjamin. Kelvin Benjamin's actually not a terrible fit with him for the same reason that Kelvin Benjamin was a decent fit with Cam Newton. But all these concerns are important. And they gave up 2 second-round picks. They gave up 2 picks in the 50s.
Yeah.
So
what's funny about this whole situation is Josh Allen's not even going to play this year probably. So it's really just going to be a year of A.J. McCarron. You probably should take a life insurance policy out before.
Because they lost Cordy Glenn, they lost Eric Wood, and they lost Richie Incognito since last we saw them. And you don't want to throw Josh Allen to the Wolves. But on that note, they didn't give up their first-round pick next year. So they'll have a high pick next year to bolster this team for Josh Allen. But I'm sure, and Mike Shop and all of my friends at WGR, I'll be happy to come on this week and console the Buffalo fans, because I'm one of the few ones that will try to make a somewhat positive spin on Josh Allen. I just saw a quarterback.
But you're right. There's a good counterbalance to talk about what he could be.
Well, look, he looked to me like a quarterback who put everything on his shoulders. And some of the processing concerns, I think, were just he wasn't. I never saw him as someone that looked overwhelmed out there, where we can look back at some of the things maybe we missed with Blaine Gabbert, where you just could see that feeling of like smoke coming out of his ears. I think there were things that he missed, but I think that it was because he was trying to take on the defense in a way with his very considerable tools that sometimes allowed him to make those kinds of plays that are just demoralizing for a defense. And I think that part of his game can translate because of his ability to elude and shake off pressure, because of his ability to make excellent touch throws even from odd platforms, and his aggressive thinking, because he's still keeping the whole field in play for the entire play. And there's not many quarterbacks in the NFL can do that. And hopefully if the offensive line is patched up, they can still have LaShawn McCoy, and we'll see if LaShawn McCoy's drop-off is coming soon.
And I think the intersection that you're talking about is really where that tipping point's going to be for his career, which is he the player who actually is the narrative correct that you're asserting that he put everything on his back? And if that's the case, then it does explain the idea that he sees easy plays and tries to make harder ones and ends up making it more difficult on his team when it fails. So there is certainly merit to that possibility, but also, how much do you do that when you scout, and how much can you really apply that? Because when you look at some of the situations, and I think of all the time, I always think of this Iowa play on a trip set where he has the easy third down in field goal range, and he's got the correct read, and he stares at it his first 2 steps, looks completely to the opposite side, sees a flash of pressure, and next thing you know, he's running about, from one sideline to the next and takes himself out of field goal range. And I see that repeatedly on some of his tape. And you just say, is he going to grow out of that? Or is that how he's always going to be? And that intuition factor is always the toughest thing, because to me, that's what I'm looking for. That's the hard thing to teach, is how do you piece all this together and make those right decisions? Because footwork, arm motion, some of those things either you don't need to redo, some of those things you can teach. And so when I look at this guy's game, it really is going to be fascinating, because either they made a slam dunk. It's the biggest boom bust pick of the first 8 picks of this class right now.
Yeah, it is.
I was talking to like Justice and Stoner before we recorded Setting the Edge a couple weeks ago. And we were just talking about like those sacks that he takes, where he's starting off on one side of the pocket and just goes all the way across the field and just gets hawked. Now just imagine it's like Von Miller coming after you or something.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not going to play this year, so he's going to get a chance to work on it. But
how do you learn flashes of pressure and when you have a real easy lane to step up and climb? How do you learn that? I don't think that's hard to teach. It's fight or flight mode, and you better have that footwork and then also have the ability to be that counter puncher and slide away and keep your feet and make that throw. And it just doesn't happen enough. And of course, the team known for linebackers gets the best linebacker in this class.
Yeah, they do. And Roquan Smith, and this was a problem area for this team. Whether it was Kwiatkowski was in, and then he would get hurt. Danny Trevathan couldn't stay healthy. Jarrell Freeman couldn't stay healthy. And they have him in a scheme too that I think where we talked about maybe a little problem if he ended up with Indy, with Tennessee and Derrick Henry rumbling at him and Leonard Fournette rumbling at him. I think in a 3-4 you can hide a little bit of the way that if there is a weakness to Roquan Smith's game, but you love this pick for the Bears. And Charles, we're going to be bringing in and setting the edge. I'm glad you mentioned that. Folks got to listen to all the next generation looks at the game, and also just I love the unfiltered takes. But give us as we are going to be saying goodbye. Sadly, what's on your mind for the rest of the first round? Whatever you're going to be doing, whatever you want. You got the floor.
Well, I love Roquan Smith, and I love the fit to the Bears. I bet when Vic Fangio was watching Roquan Smith film, he probably got a little buzz for Patrick Willis. And what's funny is Patrick Willis was also the 8th pick. Was he the 8th pick his year too?
I think 9th. But Patrick Willis, Luke Kuechly, this is the spot where that elite inside linebacker goes off the board. Yeah.
So I think it's gonna be a really fun defense. Just with all the speed and talent they have in the front seven, I think they're gonna make some noise this year. And just looking onto the rest of the draft, Rosen for sure is gonna be interesting to see where he goes, and then Lamar Jackson, and then now like this tier, like this run on defensive tackles is probably about to start with guys like Vita Vea, Daron Payne, Taven Bryan. It's just gonna be fun to see where those guys go too.
What do you think about Vea? I want to ask you since you brought Vea, because there is a bit of a split on. He's a 2-down player. There's no way you would spend a first round pick on him, or he can be a lot more than that. Where on that spectrum are you?
Well, when I look at this defensive tackle class, Vea, Payne, and Bryan, they're all kind of in the same group to me, where the flashes, the peaks are just so tremendous that you understand why anyone would have them as a first round talent, but the consistency is not always there. You look at a guy like Vea, the athleticism is ridiculous, obviously, and he didn't have a complete profile, but just being able to run a 5'1" at 347 pounds is like Madden creative player good. So, but you just don't see the pass rush flashes as much as you would hope from someone who's going to be touted as top 15 type player. So I just think like the down-to-down playmaking ability isn't always there with him, and that always worries me with guys who don't play a lot of snaps going as high draft picks.
I just want to say that before Charles leaves, that as someone who started the Futures franchise at Football Outsiders, it's nice that they waited to get someone like Charles to be able to do Futures and fill in there. So, and Charles, to be the next part of that alumni. So I'm glad that you and your cohort there are filling in there, because you're doing excellent work.
Yeah, thanks for the love, Matt. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Charles, hold on before you go. I want to ask you something, actually, because I know that you've talked about how actually going to the combine, talking to some of the figureheads and getting to engage with them and being around the players really was one of the most enjoyable experiences you've had. And I remember it, when you were really drunk on it, like, this is all I want to do. How has it changed, how you're watching the draft, or the layers that you're seeing that maybe you didn't see before you had that experience?
Well, before I went to the combine, and the coolest part about going to the combine is being able to talk to the players, and not in the fact that, like, we all know that they're real life humans, but I feel like sometimes we get a little bit detached and we just kind of see Josh Rosen, quarterback, UCLA, or, so-and-so. We just see them as a function of a football machine. But when you get to sit down and talk to them, it kind of humanizes them a little bit, and you get to learn their stories and talk to them. So, it just kind of puts more of a face and the personality behind the guys we see go put on the shoulder pads and jerseys every Sunday. So and also being able to meet like people in the media I watched for so long was awesome too. So that's what I got out of it.
It's awesome to get to have you as a part of our draft night hangout. And the internet's new single drops tomorrow, by the way. Yep. So that's exciting. Hopefully tour. Mike McGlinchey, one more thing for you.
Justice.
As Justice.
Yeah.
Mosqueda, the other half of the Setting the Edge duo, is here for hour 2. Thank you, Charles. At 4Verts, everybody.
Peace.
Tapping them out. Can you guys hear me fine?
Yeah.
We can.
Perfect. Welcome first. And here's Dr.
Whoa!
All right. The gang is all here. So first, I mean, because the doc is in. Doc, tell us your thoughts to this point.
It's a lot. I've been arguing about that Travis mockery that is Taylor Swift's whatever it was cover of Earth, Wind, and Fire. So It took me an hour to get over that in time to.
Well, you know how that was in our household.
Yeah, that's where I saw it.
Yeah, I think there
was my attention.
I think there was a tweet that was like, "How did the race war start?" It was Travis.
That's the only pick that's better than the Josh Allen pick at this stage, in my opinion. But
no, I guess I'm surprised that there's only been. Well, has there been more than one trade yet? Just the one.
Just one. Well, unless we count the Jets and the Colts before the draft started.
Yeah, that's true. So I thought it was going to be a little bit wilder after it seemed like all day long the tide was turning from Sam Darnold to Baker Mayfield with the first pick. It looked like things, people might be falling over each other to try to get to Josh Rosen and others who is still on the board. So
it's about to happen, I think. That's
what
I'm hearing from
Where are we? San Francisco
sources.
Just picked, and you from sources.
Yeah. Well, and there's been a lot of talk since we're leading up to it, and we've talked about Josh Rosen a lot, that Miami and Adam Gase have always had a penchant for, always had an affinity for Josh Rosen, which kind of makes sense. And there was a piece that even came out that said that they've reassured Ryan Tannehill that he's going to start this year. But obviously, there's a reason that you do that. Justice Mosqueda, welcome. We just saw San Francisco go with Mike McGlinchey in the trench. And what's really interesting about this is Gil Brandt, who's the true godfather of this scene. He was asked by Peter King who would be a surprise in the top 10. And Peter King reported it as he expected him, like, here's my surprise top 10 pick. And Gil Brandt said, no. I meant it would surprise me if he was a top 10 pick. But here he is. And now, the Cardinals just traded up.
There we go.
Justice.
Solves a couple problems right there, right?
What's going to happen? What's going to happen with the Cardinals trading up? Who do you expect the Cardinals traded up for, Justice?
Oh, I assume it's gonna be Rosen, right? is there any doubt? You move up for a quarterback. That's kind of how this thing works out. I know I tweeted out probably around combine time and just like looked at like basically if you don't have one of the first 2 or 3 picks, right? The only way that you get a quarterback is by trading up in the first round. Like quarterbacks don't really fall to your lap like you think they would. Like these teams are actively trading up when these guys are going in the top 5, top 10, top 15. So it doesn't surprise me. I don't think. I mean, it's not going to be Minkah Fitzpatrick or anything like that. I don't think so. I would assume that it's Josh Rosen.
Lamar Jackson be the only other name to even mention. But before we find out that they likely went ahead and the Raiders trade down, McGlinchey is interesting because San Francisco has Joe Staley. There was some talk that they were going to trade. There was a rumor today that they were going to trade their right tackle, who's coming back from shoulder surgery, Trent Brown, to the Broncos for a second-round pick. And they also signed in the offseason Gary Gilliam, the former Seahawk. And one of the beat writers opined that maybe that's a sign that they would put Trent Brown on the block. And now they'd go ahead and draft McGlinchey, which makes it seem almost like a foregone conclusion that Trent Brown is going to be there for the highest bidder. And, of course, building around Jimmy Garoppolo, which, the defense has a lot of holes. We'll see about Reuben Foster. But Justice, you've been doing great work on edge prospects. You've been doing great work on the Packers as always. But you have a piece now that you've revived for the second year about tendencies, and you had this stuff running through your head as you were putting that piece together. In these teams that we've watched make picks and move up or move down so far, what do you feel like stands out as something that you learned, reinforced, went counter to, or maybe a new regime that we're learning about? What do you feel like from this first 9 picks you're going to take away in terms of tendencies?
I would say probably the strongest one would be that like Saquon Barkley going to is a very Gettleman pick, right? I think everyone would pretty much agree on that, where it's like that style of drafting, that Carolina Panthers style of drafting that's kind of spread somehow now to 3 NFL teams, it's very easy to look at, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, you guys are going to do like the very old school type of thing because Gettleman was a high school coach in the 70s and he drafts NFL teams in 2018 like he was a high school coach in the 70s. So that's probably the one that stands out the most to me. Tampa coming up is kind of interesting, 12, just because I think I talked to you about this where it was we were talking about Saquon Barkley if he ended up falling to 7, because if he didn't go 2, it kind of gets a little bit volatile after that, right? You never know with running backs. But we were talking about with Tampa when they were sitting there at 7 is Tampa. I think they've used 3 of their top. So they've had 3, or they've used 3 of their 12 top 100 picks since Lich Light. I don't know how you say his name. Took over as the general manager. There you go. Took over as the general manager for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and of those 12 picks, they've only used 3 on offensive players. So they've only used 3 on defensive players. So Tampa definitely offense very early on, repeatedly. So it'll be interesting to see what they do at 12, because at 12 they can't even really. I mean, there's not really a receiver that we're banging the table for. They have a quarterback, running back. There's no one there. Offensive tackle, I don't think so. Maybe they go after guard, like Isaiah Wynn surprisingly goes early or something like that. But I don't know.
Or can we touch on McGlinchey for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, me?
Yeah,
go ahead. Go ahead. Touch
okay. He's basically, if you look at all Pro Football Focus's numbers and stuff, I think that basically accurately reflects what he is as a football player. Pass protection, not that great. Definitely very above average for a left tackle in college football. I wouldn't say that he's elite, though. He didn't really test. I wouldn't expect him to test like a super elite athlete. I would be shocked if he tested like a bad athlete. I don't think that he's a guy who people will throw the tab. They throw the label right tackle, right? Or like start inside a guard and kick out. I think he's definitely a left tackle. I just don't think he's a super premier left tackle. It's kind of similar to like Ronnie Stanley when he was coming out of Notre Dame. Guy was playing for the Baltimore Ravens. And just an absolute just run left, like Notre Dame run left was automatic last year between McGlinchey and Nelson. So I don't think run block is going to be an issue for him at all. And in the NFL level, runs aren't really going outside the tackles anyway. So he shouldn't really hurt his team anywhere as run game.
And the Bucs benefit with this trade up, because if they were looking at Minkah Fitzpatrick or Derwin James as the pick at 7, which many had them linked to, they're going to get at least one of the 2 of them there at 12. As we wait for the Cardinals selection. There it is.
That's it. Good.
In the desert.
The best quarterback in the class.
And Mike McCoy. And, we've seen Mike McCoy. I mean, he pulled a rabbit out of the hat with Tim Tebow. Now you're giving him almost a head start with Josh Rosen. So now he's your number 1 quarterback. Why?
Well, why is he my number 1 quarterback? Or why is he why? Okay. Why is my number 1 quarterback? Because he understands how to process the middle of the field. He understands he's got terrific footwork. He understands how to play under pressure. And while he makes some dumb mistakes, they're usually mistakes of immaturity, trying to be more than what he needs to be. And it's very clear that he's doing that. It's not as questionable as it is with Josh Allen. I think that what you're seeing is obvious situations where he's trying to do too much, where he's trying to throw across his body in the red zone or late in a game where there's nothing open. And he played on a team that, frankly, has always been filled with, nice high school talent that has never been able to convert through that. There's a reason why Jim Mora Jr. doesn't have a job anymore at this stage after he's gone through 2 high-end quarterbacks and failed to really become a strong team, but fielded a ton of great draft picks, on defense and along certain positions. So when you look at Josh Rosen and his game, you're looking at someone who just truly understands how to play the position. The mechanics are down, and that gives you such an advantage early on to be able to just work on the craft of the game. And that's so important with quarterbacking, because at this level, it's a performance-oriented medium, and you have to kind of go through taking chances and risks on stage to kind of know where you are. But if you have mechanical issues that get in the way with it, it's like a musician who doesn't have good tone or doesn't have good rhythm, and then they're also trying to make good music. It just becomes a mess. So when you look at where Rosen's going to wind up, he's on a team with a good front office staff. He's got a veteran in Larry Fitzgerald who is going to be a terrific mentor for him because of all the quarterbacks that he's played with. And he's also, and you have a terrific running back, on top of that. So this is a team that's going to be able to build around Rosen. And you have Sam Bradford, who obviously has been around enough and is a competent enough quarterback. And also they have similar skill sets to a degree because they're both very good in the vertical game. They're both technically proficient. They're both tough enough to be able to maneuver and find that open man in the middle of the field and throw with anticipation. So there's a lot of similarities, and he gets a mentor at least for a year to be able to work with here. And on top of it, you get the dumbass NFL that basically has, that has completely, flipped this quarterback class upside down. And he gets the benefit of being able to sit a little bit or have the luxury of possibly doing so, at least until, Bradford sprains or breaks something, stepping over a manhole cover. And then then maybe he ends up getting on the field a little bit earlier. But this is an aggressive quarterback with smarts who just got picked apart because, frankly, the NFL is a conservative political entity that was afraid, as we saw very clearly by Robert Kraft, of Donald Trump basically saying some, ripping apart the NFL more, and that some of the fan base who, has voted for Trump, or a lot of it, and has that mentality, would probably, align more with the president than they would with the league in terms of, politics and the way that we've had a contentious political environment. So there's a little bit of that in there with the way that teams look at this, because they look at leadership and this component. Sometimes they overemphasize the wrong things and underemphasize the right things. And I think that's exactly what they've done with Rosen.
Waiting on the Miami pick here. It should be, if Miami's rational, it should be Tremaine Edmunds. Gene, are you still with us? I see the helmet. We may have to wait for Gene to come back to talk some defensive prospects.
It should be not starting Kiko Alonso next year. Absolutely should be the pick right here.
Yeah, which would be Tremaine Edmunds with Roquan Smith gone, or maybe Leighton Vander Esch, which implicates Dr. Gene a little bit on the question of the cervical question. But it's been interesting too to see now we have, the obvious candidates took their quarterbacks. Arizona took a quarterback, Buffalo took a quarterback, Cleveland took a quarterback, and the Jets did. Who's going to take Lamar Jackson? Is it going to be the Saints after all? Is it going to be the Patriots? Is it going to be one of these teams looking to the future? But we get the Dolphins pick here, and we shall see. Well, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and I can this pick you can defend for sure. I think that they've had Rashad Jones has been outstanding. He's been banged up, and certainly they've been missing that other safety nickel corner. I don't know that I would take him over Derwin James, but Justice, when you see Minkah Fitzpatrick, it's still going to mean Kiko Alonso's on the field, but there's a lot of draft left. Well, what about Fitzpatrick on the field for the Dolphins?
Yeah, I think the Dolphins are just kind of in the spot where you can go BPA, honestly. Like if you look at the roster and what type of guys that they're paying, the top earning players on their payroll, basically. I forget what the word is. If you look at their salary cap and see how large the cap hits are, and you go down, the positions at the top of their payroll are the same positions that are like their positions of need. So it's really confusing in that, like, they're paying offensive tackles, they're paying offensive linemen, they still have a better offensive line. They can't cover in that middle zone, but they're paying Kiko Alonso. Just things like that. They're spending a bunch of money and picks on wide receivers, and it's still a question mark. So I think just getting a solid guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick, who he could play the slot, maybe he could kick out to corner, maybe he could kick out to safety. But we know for sure that he could be that flexible overhang type of player who can roll up, roll down, depending on what the coverage is. So that's a pretty solid pick in my opinion. The only other thing would have been linebacker, right, where that was pretty obviously position of need with a guy who's still on the board. But if you want to take a cornerback or a slot, any guy in coverage over, a run first linebacker, that's fine with me.
Yeah, and I might have gone with Derwin James over Fitzpatrick. And
how would you get him on the field at the same time, though? I guess that would be my question. James and Rashad Jones. Because they kind of sort of play the same position.
They do, although James, I saw James play well in space. I saw James blitz. I saw James be able to line up in the slot. I saw James be able to do some of the same things as Fitzpatrick, where you can move him around. So I saw him almost like a Troy Polamalu type, where you use him to make the kind of plays that tilt the field a little bit, and you let him loose, especially as you mentioned, with all that money tied up to make pass rush. I think that they could have leveraged him. But I just think that when I watched Fitzpatrick, I know there was, I think Lance Zierlein put out there that teams didn't necessarily see him as that top 5, top 7 type talent, and a slot corner, a deep safety, maybe, unless you're talking about someone like Earl Thomas, who we might see traded in the next 2 days. It's the tactical value, but we're splitting hairs here. So we move on now to Tampa, and I think Tampa, and what's interesting here too is Tampa recoup 2 second-round picks to move down and may well get the same player they would have taken at number 7 if it's Derwin James. And the Arizona only had to give up a 3rd and a 5th to move up from 15
Oh,
to
really?
10. That's it. That's all.
The Bills got swindled.
Yeah.
That's also interesting because if teams weren't really willing to move up for Josh Rosen, do you think that they're going to be willing to move up for Lamar Jackson? And if they're not doing that, then do we think that there's any chance? I know I've been looking at gambling odds a bunch for the draft, and 5.5 is very firm on the how many quarterbacks go in the first round. And I just could not see myself taking the over on that. I just can't imagine Mason Rudolph goes in the first round in the same draft where Josh Rosen's falling into at least the second, third, if not the middle of it, right?
But it's interesting though, because you think about it, and I've mentioned earlier on the show that there's I think Scott Bischoff mentioned it, that he heard that there's a possibility on the table for, if Darnold already went, that the Giants would trade up with the Eagles to get Mason Rudolph at the end of the first round. And then there's the fact that I've also heard from somebody else kind of who's a little bit deeper in to what's going on, saying that the trades are about to happen within the next 10 picks, that it's going to be pretty hot and heavy, especially as teams get a little more twitchy about getting a quarterback. And that was just before the Josh Rosen pick, the trade happened. So we'll see. I mean, will it be 6? That's a hard thing to bet for, as you said, because, there's only been 2 years where that's happened, 99 and 83.
You guys want to know what the easiest bet was the entire week? There was lines that were up for Notre Dame over 1.5 players in the first round.
Oh,
we already hit that. Yeah, there's some layups. I feel pretty good about some of these. Derwin's making me sweat a little bit, but there was Derwin under 16, Saquon Barkley over 1.5. There's a bunch of stuff if you keep your eyes out for some of this gambling stuff. It's pretty crazy.
So who's the player that you want to see drafted that hasn't been picked yet in the first round that you're just keeping tabs on?
I assume Derwin's going to go 12. I'm just gonna assume he's gonna go to the Bucs. After that, probably Harold Landry, the pass rusher out of Boston College. He's my baby this year. So
Green Bay, and what do you think? 50-50 Green Bay takes him, or is it more like 80-90% they're gonna take a defensive back?
I'm scared they're gonna take Davenport. No, because if he's gone, I don't think they're gonna take a defensive back. I don't think they're gonna reach for Josh Jackson if Derwin James is gone. They've just kind of put themselves in a situation where you kind of gotta at 14, you're at the end of a run. Kind of, you know what I mean? So you'll be getting the same type of talent that was going at pick 7, but you're not necessarily going to be able to select the position, right? So if a defensive back just isn't there, don't take a defensive back. Don't force it. Just take the pass rusher. If the pass rusher is falling down the board, that's perfectly fine. So I think it would probably be down to Davenport or Harold Landry. A lot off the ball linebacker might be something that they look at, but they haven't drafted an off the ball linebacker in the top 100 in the last 10 years. So
right, Clay Matthews.
But he was a pass rusher. Yeah.
Right, when they got him.
Asterisk.
So you will see the Bucs selection here, but yeah, and of course we'll see Ted Thompson handing over the reins this year and seeing how that changes things as we're waiting on the Bucs selection.
Oh boy, Vita Vea.
Oof.
Well, he is a defender. It's another 12th pick, but he's not Danny Shelton. He's a much more athletic player than Danny Shelton, and we saw Danny Shelton traded for not very much before his rookie contract was up. I don't ever see that. So I saw Vita Vea actually mocked to the Bucs at 7 today. I don't remember exactly which one of the late mocks it was. It was one of the mocks that came out today. And the one thing I could say to defend it is that if you put him next to Gerald McCoy, you're going to unlock. It's not quite Darnold and Sue, but it's a reasonable imitation of it. What do you think, Justice?
He's a nose tackle. At the end of the day, he's a nose tackle. I don't know how much penetration he's going to be doing. If I'm picking a defensive tackle at 12, right? If I'm picking a defensive tackle at 12, I want him to be able to get after the quarterback. So this one, It's a little high to me. It wouldn't surprise me if he was the best nose tackle in this draft class when we look back at it in 6 years, right? But I would be pretty surprised if he ends up being the best overall defensive tackle in this draft class, just because I just don't think that the upside is there. So it'll be interesting, but Tampa's definitely all in on this defensive line. So they already paid Bo Allen, who's a nose tackle, right? They paid Mitch Unrein, I think that's how you say it, who's basically, he was a 5-tech coming from Chicago. He's going to play on the inside too. They already had Gerald McCoy, so now we have our 2 deep, completely built out of guys who are getting paid a fairly decent amount of money. They paid Vinny Curry, the Philadelphia Eagles pass rusher. They traded for Jason Pierre-Paul. They already had Noah Spence, who was a second-round pick in 2016, and William Golston's getting paid too. So, like, Tampa's all in on this defensive line. There's really no question who's going to get playing time on this team. Like, it's very clear-cut who 1 through 4 at both defensive end and defensive tackle are here.
Yeah, and it's a division where, I mean, maybe you don't like Tampa secondary, but at least it is a way to address that. You have to play Cam Newton twice, you have to play Drew Brees twice, you have to play Matt Ryan twice, and it is a way to address that. You know, you got some old George Young planet theory here about Vea and his size and movement ability. But I tend to agree with you, Justice, when you watch his game that you don't see, I mean, you know, again, you don't see Aaron Donald dynamism. You don't even see like Grady Jarrett or someone like that, or Maurice Hurst, who, again, I think of Dr. Gene, and he can give us some insight on some of these medical issues. But Washington, there's the doc. So, Gene, we're getting to some defense finally. It wasn't a great top 10 for defense, but we did get to see Bradley Chubb fall a little farther than expected, Roquan Smith, and now Minkah Fitzpatrick and Vita Vea. I know you have a special appreciation for the defensive side of the ball. What strikes you about some of the defensive picks we've seen?
Admittedly, I haven't done as much preparation as I have done in previous years, but I don't know that, in the same way that we've had Myles Garrett and other edge rushers, and maybe defensive back prospects, I don't know that there was a slam dunk game changer. There's a lot of very strong players and players that could be, every down all-pro talents here on the board this year. But I don't know that there's Justice may disagree with me, but there's an obvious game changer among this bunch. So, there's been some disagreements and discussion about who's really the best defensive tackle here between Maurice Hurst and what's going on with his heart condition, and Vea, and a few other players as well. So I think I felt like I had seen Derwin James mocked to Tampa frequently this year. A little bit surprising to see that come off. It's going to be interesting to see how well he matches with Gerald McCoy. And there was some, as they're showing highlights of Vea running as a running back here. I think he's an interesting fit as a one-gap nose. It's going to be a great look next to McCoy there, with McCoy being the free technique, getting up, and Vea being almost the same things as one gap.
Is that Marion Motley?
Some jump
Nice.
cuts, 250-pound jump cuts.
And Gene, I think your mic is a little lower. Maybe, yeah.
Why don't I pull it down where actually people can hear me?
There we go. But yeah, I think you went to the same mindset I did, where, hey, you put Vea next to McCoy, and there's Washington, and Washington was a team that Vea was attached to a lot. Washington could use Derwin James. Who wouldn't use Derwin James at this point? Gene, while we're waiting for the Washington pick, we've had some different things come up in the days leading up to the draft, and some of it might be to drive players down. We had Sony Michel, bone on bone cartilage. Maurice Hurst, you mentioned with the heart issue. Lead Vander Esch, a cervical issue. It's a question about Jair Alexander's knee being flagged. Harold Landry and his knee issue. Anything that stood out to you looking at this draft class and some of the medical questions, or any background, anything you want to add to that picture?
Yeah, it stood out how quiet it was. I don't feel like there was a lot of discussion at all this year about this player being rumored to drop for medical reasons, or that player, other than Hurst. And there's some stuff that just came out with Michel, but I think it might be hard to tell with Sony Michel whether or not he's dropping because of the glut of good young running backs over the last 2 years, and then this year's class, as Matt has talked about very frequently, being as strong as it is. is he going to end up dropping because there's a medical issue, or is he going to end up dropping just because it's a deep class and, the depth allows teams to let these players slide maybe a round or two beyond they would. And you mentioned Jay Ajayi. I think the thing with these bone-on-bone conditions is not necessarily that it's an immediate concern. Is it going to prevent that player from playing 4 to 5 years down the road? So are you going to be able to finish a first contract? Are you going to be able to get to a second contract? And more, I don't know that there's, you have to be a very, very special player or just a tremendous fit for a long-term offensive coordinator that knows you very well to get a second contract of any length or consequence in this league at all. So maybe don't worry about those bone-on-bone conditions much. And, we've seen Ajayi miss practices and we've seen other running backs miss practices. But, if they can give you 40 to 50 snaps on game day and, somewhere between 12 to 20 touches, effective touches, then, maybe you don't worry about it as much. So it's more of a long-term issue. How long is his career, going to last versus, is he going to be available for you in week 1 of this year?
And Daron Payne, another nose tackle, goes off the board. And did Charles say that just as he was leaving, that we're going to see the nose tackle start to go off the board? Justice, you said that maybe Vea wasn't the best nose tackle in this draft. Do you think it's Payne, or these two guys going right next to each other? How do they stack up against each other?
I think Payne can do a little bit of both. Honestly, his numbers weren't necessarily there in terms of tackle for loss and sacks, and people point that out. But if you watch his film, especially the beginning of the year against Florida State and then the Georgia game, obviously, that everyone watched, he definitely has some penetration value to him for sure. The problem is he'll just full on disappear for stretches. So I don't know if that's Chris Jones was a guy like that from Mississippi State, where motivationally it was up and down from game to game. So I wonder if that's the issue with Daron Payne right now. But when he's on, he's definitely on. Like, he definitely has a higher upside than Vea.
The Saints trade up to 14. The Saints just traded up to 14.
It is coming. It's got to be Lamar Jackson.
It's got to be Lamar Jackson.
It is coming right here. This is exactly where I wanted him to be.
Where we feel the adrenaline rush through us, Justice. Is this something Ted Thompson would have done? Would Ted Thompson have traded down on the spot?
Ted Thompson would always trade down, buddy. Yeah, Ted Thompson's team trade down every draft.
So Brian Gutekunst maybe learned a little bit, or it has inherited some of that. And it's what's interesting about this is Harold Landry and Derwin James, which both, some by deduction, there was some talk that Green Bay was looking to trade up a few spots to try to get Derwin James. Right. And obviously,
honestly, I don't know if it would have been for Derwin James. I think Denzel Ward would have been the guy that they would have been interested in, because athletically, he basically fits what they look for to a T. So I think Ward would have been interesting. The problem was, I was surprised. I don't know how you guys felt. I was surprised when Ward went 4, right? But if Denver didn't trade out of 5 and they didn't, if the picks at worst would have been flipped from 4 and 5, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If Chubb would have gone 4, the Broncos would have taken Ward at 5. So they would have had to trade it very high up. I didn't think that it was going to be. I didn't think it was realistic that the Packers were going to move up for a player unless it was Ward, and Ward wasn't going to be there past 5 unless a team traded into the 5 slot and the Broncos moved back. So once the Broncos were on the clock, or once the news came out that they were trying to trade up to 2 and they weren't trying to trade back anymore, I kind of figured out, all right, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. So, Matt, you said this is the spot you wanted. I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but there's no reason for them to trade it for Derwin James. They're set at safety. I don't even know what other player there. Tremaine Edmunds. That doesn't.
No.
Go ahead.
No, this is Josh Norris talked about this at the Senior Bowl with me. He said that he had heard that they were interested in Jackson from the get-go, and I thought that was the perfect spot for him to land because Drew Brees understood what development meant to him. Sean Payton is certainly a guy who's picked some guys that he can work with and is known for developing players, even though he hasn't developed great quarterbacks, with the Saints. He has an offense that's flexible. This is a team that plays on turf that can take advantage of Jackson's ability as a big play runner, but also understands that he is the best pocket player in this class in terms of being able to maneuver from pressure, keep his eyes downfield, and throw the ball. And he's got the quietest feet of that group. And, a player who made that term was Tony Romo, talking about quiet feet. And there's a guy that, happens to be an alumnus of what Sean Payton's program and close to him, and Tony Romo and Sean Payton have that relationship. I think he recognizes that. I know talking to Russ Landy when we were talking about pre-draft with Lamar, he said he was stunned to see how good he was in the pocket. And so when you look at this situation, you get a team where you've got the mentor in Drew Brees, you've got the young upstart in Jackson who understands how to play the pocket, but you can also mix in this Perkins influenced offense that is the easiest of the offenses in the NFL right now to really onboard and learn what you need to learn, and be able to get up and play early. It doesn't mean that you get in a huge inherent advantage, but the verbiage isn't as difficult to learn early on. So that allows you to, in the certain play types that are available, they aren't so intensive. It's more about motioning players and finding the matchups. And with that strong run game, that strong offensive line in place, this would just be, to me, this has always been like the dream spot for Lamar Jackson of any player in this class. This is the one pick player to team that I've wanted more than anything. So I'm hoping that this is the case, and it rings true. And we'll give credit to Josh Norris for kind of talking about this very early in the process.
And the drumbeat has been steady throughout. And Green Bay gets New Orleans' first-round pick next year, by the way, which sounds about right. So, how does that strike you, Justice?
That's a lot more than the Cardinals gave up. So as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much that's what it costs, right? So it's like something like a 5th round pick, a future first, and then they drop down 14 slots. So as long as they're comfortable with someone being there at 28, that's fine with me. I wonder if it's going to be, an Isaiah Oliver type of cornerback or something like that, or if Derwin keeps falling, if Harold Landry's ankle isn't totally healed up, but they feel comfortable with it for whatever reason. It'll be interesting. Yeah, it just came on the screen, 5th round pick. So yeah, that basically looks normal to me.
And they even have ammunition. Don't they have a lot of third-day picks? I mean, they even have the ammunition to move.
They have something like 9 picks on day 3. So they have 10 now. They
can move back up in increments, and in a small increment if they want to. If it is Oliver or one of the corners that Josh Jackson was a player mocked to them a lot. We'll see the pick here for the Saints. Gene, we were talking about Daron Payne and Vita Vea and the idea of being able to provide pass rush, and that's what a interior defensive lineman needs to be able to do to merit a pick that high. What would your philosophy be on what a defensive tackle has to provide to be worth a pick in the top 13?
I think today's defensive lines are 8 players deep, right? So there's going to be a rotation and package dependent base versus nickel versus dime versus, there's some defenses where you're only rushing 2 guys really at this point, or only have 2 players with their hands down. So you have to be dominant in one way or other. Either you have to be an immovable force against the run and a disruptive force against the run, or you've got to be able to get upfield and impact the pocket against the pass. And I know you guys have spoken about this a lot, and we all have over the years, because of the offenses where the ball is coming out much quicker, you have to be able to affect the pocket up the middle. And, even the best edge rushers in the world sometimes have difficulty getting there. If you're looking at, 2 or 3 step drops, quick routes coming out of the backfield and out of the slot, to have those guys be able to do that. So the first step of Aaron Donald, the first step of Gerald McCoy, and those other sorts of players there is what you have to have there. And I don't know that Vita Vea and Daron Payne necessarily match that. I think Payne did some pretty good stuff during the championship playoffs there in those 2 games that Alabama played. But I think probably why you're seeing these guys go is the depth of the defensive tackle group this year is not very good. So if you don't get one of these guys and you feel like they can be a starter for you, then if you're that part of the draft, you're not going to get a look at these guys in the 2nd round, or certainly anything close to this caliber of player from behind. And positional scarcity plays a role when you're talking about players that can get upfield. And if this is the closest we get here, and there is something with Hurst's heart condition that, wow, I'll let you guys talk about the Saints pick here. A little bit surprising. But I think that's what you're getting. So getting upfield is big. I think both of these players can do it. How consistent they're going to be able to do it and over how many snaps a game remains to be seen.
It's actually Marcus Davenport.
Okay.
Justice.
There we go. If he fits his pad level, he's going to be a really good player. But fixing your pad level at 6'6" isn't something that necessarily comes naturally.
Yeah, there were definitely flashes where you see, the best all around skill set, arguably, of an edge rusher here. Because I missed kind of the first part of this. I don't know if Charles talked about it or Justice, if you hit on this while I dropped out a second ago there. But I don't know that you would put Nick Chubb. I'm going to have Nick Chubb on my brain like Waldman all weekend long. I don't know if you put Bradley Chubb in the category of a pure edge rusher where his best move is an edge rush. And I think maybe, if you fix some of Davenport's issues, when you see him get off the ball, when you see his pad level right, when you see him, for a guy his size, he's got some dip and bend to him. So, there's an argument that maybe he becomes, the best all-around edge prospect in this draft. But there are issues to fix, and I'm always with Justice. It's pad level, and as we talked about with Ryan Riddle a couple of years ago, we had conversations about Bud Dupree, flexibility in the ankles, and those two things are exceedingly difficult to fix. And if it doesn't get fixed, then Davenport is probably not going to be able to hit a ceiling.
He's definitely more. So I do the force players thing where you look at athletic measurables, project edge rushers, right? And I think that helps if we do look at guys like you're saying, like pure edge rushers. So guys like Harold Landry. I think a guy who plays like Harold Landry, he should translate well to the combine. If those two things, if he doesn't translate on paper and those two things don't match up, then you have an issue. A guy like Bradley Chubb on film, he was, he didn't look like he was going to be a pure edge bender. Didn't really matter to me that he didn't run the perfect 40 time or the perfect 3-cone, right? So to me, that was fine. I didn't really expect his playing style to reflect that way. It's the same way with like Jadeveon Clowney was a guy like that. Joey Bosa was a guy like that, where it's like, if this guy can play and he can cross an offensive tackle's face, I don't expect him to necessarily be a guy who just dominates at the combine. Davenport certainly has strong hands. He's certainly very active. He has a ton of production. I think he played one offensive tackle who is in the NFL currently or is projected to be drafted today. I don't know about next year's draft class in terms of the CUSA conference offensive tackles, but I know he's played only one offensive tackle who's now in the NFL, and he was like a 5th-round pick from the Raiders last year, the kid out of Texas A&M, and he's converted to a backup guard now. So to say that really he hasn't faced any NFL caliber bookends until the Senior Bowl is pretty accurate. So to see how that pad level is going to play out at the next level when he is a 6'6" type of guy will definitely be interesting, because I think the evaluation is very clear in terms of the pad level needs to get fixed. If he can play with his hands above his eyes, he's going to be a very quality player. If he doesn't, he's not. But for anyone to say with conviction that he is or isn't going to be good, I think it's probably out of line, because we really haven't seen what he's going to do with NFL-style coaching. The one thing that I will say, 2 first-round picks for Marcus Davenport seems like a lot to me for a project pass rusher. So
let me mention one thing real quick, because Justice glossed over this, and I think it's very important for anybody who is new to Justice's work or just somewhat familiar with it. What Justice does with force players, I know people in the league who've basically said that is some of the most straight up best example of good analytic combined film work that you're going to see in the public eye. And that and I know I have never said this to Justice, but what was said to me recently was, whether he knows it or not, that's the kind of work that he did is on caliber with something that you would see in an academic study, in terms of the caliber of work that he does with this. And the people I hear that from don't tend to take very kindly to the analytics that are sold in the public eye of the NFL. So if you want something that is really pinpointed an area and studied it at a high level, go check out his force players work. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll add to that Justice and I have been discussing force players for a while now. And what I liked is, Justice, I remember when you and I first talked about it, it wasn't just that you were looking for a skeleton key in the numbers. You had a working hypothesis of why this would apply. So with that, tell us about this year's force players.
Really at the top of the draft, it's Harold Landry, the pass rusher out of Boston College. Then after that, gets a little bit murky, right? So some of these top guys, like I already mentioned, Chubb and Davenport don't necessarily fit that mold. I wouldn't have expected Chubb to. I don't care that Chubb didn't. Chubb can play football for me. That's perfectly fine. I would have taken him in the top 5. Davenport, probably not so much. I probably would have taken him 20s at the earliest, probably 40s-ish, around there. But after that, the real projects of this class are guys like Josh Sweat is probably the closest resemblance to like a Danielle Hunter type of guy, where he was playing 5 tech. He was making tackle reads where your eye level at the line of scrimmage is on offensive tackles instead of on the ball. So when the ball is snapped, you don't necessarily move on that. So your get off shouldn't be great. You're moving on the offensive tackle's movement, which makes you a run-first player instead of a pass-first player, a non-penetration player. And so basically Florida State had this hyper-athletic dude who they put in a bad position, and he still was producing, even after he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Everyone knew that he was going to be a super athlete, and then he had a couple major knee injuries. But at the end of the day, he ended up producing and putting it all together at the end for Florida State, which was kind of the situation that Danielle Hunter was in and why he went in the 4th round. Now, he's basically Danielle Hunter with a knee injury, so it's harder to project him at the next level, but he is a guy who does pass. After that, it's guys like Uchenna Nwosu, who's a pass rusher from UCLA, and actually Rasheem Green, who's he got down to the 270s. I think he was playing way higher than the 270s when he was playing for the Trojans. But both of those USC pass rushers ended up being force players in this class. I'm very interested in seeing how Green's projection moves forward, because Green is a guy who I look at the tape and I don't even necessarily see the athlete. And maybe that's because all these numbers are density adjusted and he's 270 pounds. He's more like a Scott Crichton type of guy. And Scott Crichton ended up being out of the league in 4 years or whatever. So I think there's a higher risk of Green not becoming a 10-sack guy at the next level than in Nwosu, Sweat, or Landry.
Yeah, I saw Green as more of a 3-4 defensive end.
I thought so too, until he got down to 274 or something at the combine, and that's real light. I don't think the only defensive tackle who I could think of who was playing in the 270s last year was Chris Smith, who was playing a yard off the ball for the Cincinnati Bengals, and he ended up getting signed by the Cleveland Browns, and he's going to be an edge defender.
So lots of stuff going on here. The Raiders take Colton Miller, and Colton Miller, most frequently you'd see mocked to the Patriots as a moldable lump of clay into a Nate Solder replacement. All the athletic attributes you want in a tackle, not necessarily the tape that you want. And the Bills not yet satisfied, trading away 2 second-round picks to move up to take Josh Allen. Now Ozzie Newsome in his last draft, and we'll miss you, Ozzie. As a Steelers fan, I hated it. I hated watching Ozzie Newsome
come back to Cleveland.
Yeah, well, he gets a trade down here. And there was some talk I saw that actually the Ravens were looking at McGlinchey or Miller, and instead, with both of them gone, and a 3rd-round pick, they move up to the early 3rd, basically the 65th overall pick. They move up from the 5th to the 3rd. So the Bills showing some clarity here, and maybe an offense, they need offensive linemen, but that seems like jumping the gun. One of the things I want to say about the move up for Davenport really quick is that the Lions actually added the defensive line coach from UTSA. And so there was a lot of talk that he might be a target of the Lions. So if the Saints really wanted Davenport, then there's a reason that they felt they had to move up, but all the talk was moving up for a quarterback. There was a lot of talk that they would move up. So this is going to be fascinating, though. So we've seen a trend that we've seen here that I think matches what we've been observing is who are the picks that have gone earlier than people expected? An edge rusher, 2 offensive tackles, and those positions. And even depending on how you saw Denzel Ward, some saw that as a surprise. So all about the pass. Matt, you want to take a stab at what the Bills might be thinking here moving up as we're about to hear the pick?
No idea, really. I mean, this is a situation where, you could certainly need an offensive line. So maybe at this stage,
Calvin Ridley.
That would be nice too, to kind of pair with Allen, and it would provide some excitement for the team. But they get Tremaine Edmunds. There you go.
Ooh.
Who we thought that maybe would go to the Saints as a possibility, but weren't Lamar Jackson and obviously Davenport. So Edmunds being one of the most athletic linebackers in this class. But we'll let Justice and Gene kind of take it away from here because they're the experts on this.
Yeah.
I'll just say really quickly when we were talking about tendencies, and I was talking about this Carolina Panthers school of drafting kind of spreading in the NFL, and McDermott obviously being the head guy with the Buffalo Bills. McDermott has Bill Belichick power. he was running that draft with basically like a dummy general manager last year. If you want to look at a team that would have traded up in the first round for an off-the-ball linebacker, I feel like the Carolina Panthers would be very high on that list, simply considering the fact that they have 3 first-round linebackers on their roster already. So them going after this type of pick, even though people don't necessarily think of off-the-ball linebackers as premier positions, doesn't really surprise me.
Yeah, and of course, going back to Carolina, you've got Luke Kuechly, Thomas Davis, Shaq Thompson, who just got his 5th-year option picked up. It all makes a lot of sense. Gene, you get a chance to take in any of Tremaine Edmunds? Or you want to talk about him or Roquan Smith or anybody else? We're probably going to see 2 more off-ball linebackers in this first round.
Yeah, possibly. I think the thing I like about Edmunds is he just never stops, and I think that works well in a kind of a McDermott, and Leslie Frazier is going to be the defensive coordinator out there. So there's going to be a lot of aggression on the outside skirts of the ball. I think there's some questions about his instincts and coverage, which maybe doesn't go along quite as much. But, when you've got a player that's athletic as this, and you're asking him to do more zone coverage than on ball, man-to-man type situations where you're trailing tight ends and whatever down the field, I think it's a little bit better fit. And there are a ton of teams that you could argue that would need linebackers, and the Bills are chief among them. They don't really have much at all on their depth chart. You could say the same thing in many respects for Chicago, where Roquan Smith went. You're looking at a Vic Fangio defense there, and Smith can do many, many of the things that Fangio asks his weak inside linebackers to do. So you see that as a pretty good fit too. So far, I would think so good for where the linebackers have gone so far.
Edmund, if we're talking strictly ceiling, is one of those players that belongs up there in the conversation as as high a ceiling as anybody in this class, and with his length and his athleticism. And he's one of the players that had that crucial, the arrow pointing up coming out of the season. I think that's true about Leighton Vander Esch, watching him at Boise State, too, another off-ball linebacker that we may see. He's been linked heavy to Dallas, and now we'll have the Chargers. And since Green Bay traded down, we won't get to talk about how the Green Bay tendencies take over, but we do have some Chargers tendencies. Justice, do you have any insight into the Chargers or maybe some of the other picks coming up here? We got Seattle, who everyone's talking about trading down, Dallas at 19, Detroit coming up at 20. Anything you want to clue us into that maybe gives us an edge on predicting the picks?
The Chargers in general, they're just like I think what I wrote was like they're just like an island of misfit toys, right? So like they'll take guys who can't pee clean, they'll take guys who can't run, they'll take cornerbacks who are way too short, like all the mismatch guys, like they're full on just like consume. If those guys fall to us, we're taking them every single time. Guys like Joey Bosa, who, like I said, he didn't have great numbers on paper, even though he was a great college football player, and great numbers on paper usually don't translate to the NFL, but he did. So I wonder what they do here. I do have a little bit of inside intel. I was told that Taven Bryan is a guy to watch for the Chargers right here. And I thought that was kind of interesting because Leggett has been a guy who's been getting paid in Los Angeles, like huge amounts of money that I don't think people really understand. And now he's obviously going to be – I think he's suspended the first 4 weeks of the year. So it'll be interesting to see if they take him as an under tackle here. Brian just – if it's not a pick, I'll still explain it. Brian's just like a super athlete, just the least creative pass rusher I've ever seen, though. First step is amazing, really does need to get coached up. But it's a lot easier to play as a penetrating defensive tackle when you have a guy like Brandon Mebane next to you on the inside, and you have a guy like Leggett who will probably either get reps or he'll be coming off the bench by week 5, and in between guys like Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa. So if there's any spot that I could see like Brian fitting in and like putting it together immediately, it would be with all that help in Los Angeles.
Bloom, you're an upside guy. So let's talk about the Bills draft and the fact that they went pure upside here. What do you think about that, both risk reward standpoint here or attitude of the GM and the coaching staff?
Well, I would say that based on how we would have gauged this team going into the season, we would have had them picking higher than 7th in this draft, and they outperformed any expectations that folks would have had in McDermott's first year. They got back to the playoffs, they broke the drought, and yeah, they had a really rough offseason on the offensive line. They do have some players like Deion Dawkins, Ryan Groy that might be able to fill some of those holes, at least in the short term. They still have LaShawn McCoy still look like LaShawn McCoy to me. And you are saying, you know, we're shooting for the stars now. And look, you know, Josh Allen, we see is, like you said, big upside. Tremaine Edmunds, a really great explanation about coming from that Panthers pedigree, how much they value those off-ball linebackers. We've seen the secondary come together. You know, player I know Justice knows well, Micah Hyde, really Jordan Poyer. Also, you know, these players really clicked for them. Tre'Davious White, remember they traded down last year. It's how they got the second first-round pick, and nailed the pick on Tre'Davious White. So a lot of things have come together for them a little bit ahead of schedule. It's just the main question is giving Josh Allen. It's almost like you know, back at Wyoming last year, how he lost Tanner Gentry, he lost Hollister, he lost Brian Hill, and you really saw it was too much. And you wonder in the passing game, what is he going to have? And you know, I would have been able to defend the pick more if they would have taken DJ Moore or Calvin Ridley, because one of the things about Josh Allen is because of his arm and because of his ability to extend plays, if you have a receiver who can do damage downfield, Allen can help you unlock the value of that receiver. Now, that being said, there's still a lot of draft left. You know, we'll see.
A lot of receivers. Imagine Kiki QT in town.
Yeah, sure. Or, you know, even somebody like Richie James. I know that we both like.
Yep.
There's a lot of players, but we'll see what the Chargers do here.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Derwin James.
And they have James fall to them. And
perfect.
And it really is perfect. I know that a month ago I said Roquan Smith would have been the dream pick. Derwin James, I would say I would have had James and Roquan Smith right there with Chubb and Ward in terms of an absolute value kind of way. But this is one of those rare occasions where a glaring best player available. They just had it up on the screen that Marshawn Lattimore said, how is Derwin James still available? A glaring best player available matches a need, you know, since Eric Weddle left. And when you have the pass rush and you have the cornerbacks they have, that allows you to really unlock the value of Derwin James. Justice, keep the I know you're going to keep the positivity going on this pair. Go ahead.
Just basically, you know, cover 3 heavy defenses. You're going to need a safety, and you're going to need safety play that's very good. Basically, the way that it works in the NFL right now, especially since it's so nickel heavy, if you're going to play single high, right, and you're going to have a strong safety and he's going to be that low defender, he not only has to really be a safety, he has to both be able to play as a strong side outside linebacker, basically, right? And also a slot receiver or a slot cornerback. So Derwin James really fits in that really well. I don't think they're going to be asking him to play single high. I definitely think, you know, traditionally we think, you know, single high, cover 3 heavy defenses. We think the Seattle Seahawks. I don't think he's going to be Earl Thomas. I think he'll be closer to Cam Chancellor in that way. So we'll see. But, I mean, the Chargers have kind of needed a safety. The safety market was super low in free agency, and a lot of those guys are still kind of hanging out there. So the Chargers didn't really commit to one. So this is a pretty interesting pick, and I really like it, honestly.
And Seattle, who everybody had trades down to the Packers. Justice, the Packers move back up, and we shall see one pick after
Harold. Please, God, Harold,
and Harold Landry.
God, Harold Landry.
And Gene, what can you give us? Have you gleaned anything? You know, Landry's one of those players that wasn't even really. It wasn't like things that came out. It was just that was the big question of Landry, and of course he is the best pure edge rusher in this draft.
So I think you've said knee a couple times.
Sorry, I meant to say ankle. Yeah,
it's ankles, correct? Yeah. No, I haven't seen anything specific that has you concerned, and you know he definitely did well enough, you know, in the pre-draft season here to make you think it wasn't a major issue. Justice is going to have a lot more to say about Landry, I think, but you know I think you've maybe got some concerns about his ability to play the run, but I don't think that's what he's going to be asked to do. Not that he's going to be a situational player, or maybe earlier in his career, but I think there are ways for players like this to play the run on the way to affecting the pocket when they're in those situations. And a lot of these defenses now, when you put guys on the weak side, there's plenty that they can do, you know, where they don't have to stand up and set the edge. So, you know, maybe he's not an all-around edge prospect like a Myles Garrett or somebody else would be, but there's a lot of good things that he's going to be able to do.
I was sure hoping that the Seattle Seahawks would take Isaiah Wynn or maybe move up to get a lineman.
He'll still be there.
Yeah, he will. So we'll see if he'll be around after Atlanta here.
And, you know, we'll see. Landry is a player, I want to say going all the way back to January or February, that people were saying he won't make it past Green Bay, and maybe he won't, just not in the way you envision. Really quick on the Chargers too. I looking at the Chargers roster and looking at the deceptive nature of their season last year, because they underachieved just like the Chargers do. They're in a division that's in flux. Kansas City is handing the torch to Patrick Mahomes. They traded away Marcus Peters. Sammy Watkins was an interesting move for them, but they're in transition. Denver's in transition with Case Keenum. We'll see. And of course, Oakland and the John Gruden adventure. I feel like this is the window now with Phillip Rivers, and they needed to improve the middle of their defense in some way. I zeroed in on Roquan Smith, but Derwin James also does that, and we'll see. And you like seeing the Packers being nimble here, and as we talked about when they traded down, having the ammunition to move up. And Seattle is a team certainly going in a direction of rebuilding, and it would make sense for them to trade down. So, Gene, what do you think about Derwin James, and what do you think in general about, we're going to have maybe, I think the Steelers are a great candidate to take a safety at 28, Justin Reed or Jesse Bates possibly. And safety, a position that it isn't necessarily lumped in with running back and off-ball linebacker as a devalued position. It isn't necessarily a premium position.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, no.
Well, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about that. Well, it's more longer than that. I'm older than I guess I thought. I always think I'm younger than I am. The Adam Archuleta days and that sort of stuff, that was the end of players like this, where they were kind of pigeonholed into a strong safety spot where, those players of this size and this athleticism really weren't good cover guys at all. And all of that has gone by the wayside. Justice mentioned Cam Chancellor. He's not the first one to come through that way, but there's a ton of similar players there. And the Chargers already have somebody similar in Jatavis Brown, who, kind of came out as a defensive back, and it wasn't a surprise when they moved him down there. You've seen it out of, Deon Buchanan now. You've seen it from Mark Barron a little bit later in his career. There's lots of players that fit like this. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how these guys get deployed. You can make an argument that Jason Verrett would fit very well in the slot, that Casey Hayward would fit well in the slot. So they've got a lot of movable pieces that they can use in different ways. And I like the way Justice described that very well. Dane Brugler, listening to him over the past few weeks, has a ton of good things to say about James, and kind of a, versatility used to be, and tweener used to be, a buzzword that meant you really couldn't, you didn't fit in any one position very well. And now what it means is, what it should mean if somebody's being praised for their versatility, is that they can do multiple things well. And I think James falls into that category. And it's going to be interesting to see how, San Diego decides to use him. But they've got a lot of players that can be used in that way. And this is Gus Bradley's team now, kind of on the defensive side of the ball. And he, so could see him figuring that a player like James fits into the Cam Chancellor mold, and it would seemingly be a tremendous fit for the Chargers.
Do you think Jair Alexander's the pick here? I know Chad Ryder is sitting here on Twitter hoping that it's Alexander for Green Bay, and just would love the idea of him being this type of athlete.
It would be a paradigm shift for how they view height. So I don't think it's likely, but they need a damn cornerback. So if they did, they'd be throwing away the Ted Thompson tendencies, which is fine, I guess. But
yeah, and we've certainly seen a guy try and do that in free agency a little bit, trying to establish in his own name. But you're right, it would be a major shift. We're about to find out.
The thing about the free agency guys is the guys that he targeted in free agency were exactly what they look for in the draft, which kind of made me think that it was going to translate over.
Oh, there it is. It is the paradigm shift.
Jair?
So
yeah.
Whew.
And I love that. I mean, I was hoping that he'd be there for the Steelers. Marcus Peters is a player he's been compared to. Nice tucks, too. A very aggressive. I love the attitude he brings to his game. But you sounded pleased, Justice, and you put a lot of work into understanding the Packers' tendencies and that paradigm shift. Unpack that and tell us what you think of the pick.
Yeah, basically what they do is, what happened was basically Randy Moss came into the NFC North and they stopped drafting small cornerbacks. Ron Wolf basically never took a small cornerback after, and by small I mean not 5'11", right? Never took a small cornerback as long as he was general manager after Randy Moss joined in. Mike Sherman obviously had a couple years where he was head coach and general manager. That's when they took Ahmad Carroll, who was on the smaller side of things. He ended up busting, and then with Ted Thompson, who was an understudy for Ron Wolf, took over the team again. He basically embraced the Ron Wolf style of basically just ignoring small cornerbacks completely. So this is like the first guy who's 5'10" or smaller that the Packers have drafted in like a decade or something like that. So it's pretty surprising.
Yeah, but I think that I would have had him as the number 2 corner on the board. And again, as we get into the last hour, maybe we've got 18 picks in the first 2 hours, 3.5 hours usually. We've got more special guests, but first, it was great to have Justice Mosqueda back again, setting the edge with Charles McDonald. Make sure you listen to that. All the work that Justice is doing, and of course, a lot to learn about new tendencies and seeing old tendencies reinforced. Justice, man, thank you so much.
Anytime, guys.
Thanks, buddy.
And we've got Mark Schofield, quarterback whisperer, and Matt Batanti, draft daddy, offensive line guru, and most importantly tonight, Matt, I'll toss it to you first, Jets fan. How do you feel?
Can you guys hear me?
You're on.
I'm on a potato, so I plug the headphones into potato. So this is what you got. I'm okay with it. I mean, as a Jets fan, I'm hardwired to hate everything and be disappointed and have some serious negative tendencies. But I obviously liked Baker Mayfield as a cultural fit. He goes 1. Sam Darnold, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. I know he's got flaws. I know he's not that athletic in terms of raw skills, but he seems to be a guy that does his job, and I guess we'll see. In my heart of hearts, I liked Saquon Barkley, but that obviously wasn't going to happen. So, I mean, I can live with it. I'm an offensive line guy. I pretty much rely on what other people tell me about the quarterbacks. So if people like them, that's good. Personally, I was glad they did not take Josh Rosen, just because I did not want to see what would happen. I don't think that franchise can handle it.
Yeah. Woody Johnson and Josh Rosen might not have seen things eye to eye, but the kind of other people you should ask about the quarterbacks, that's Mark Schofield. Mark, we're gonna, and I'll try to jump in occasionally when we see picks. Dallas is on the clock right now with in Jerry World, but let's step through each. The quarterbacks are the key to unlocking the draft, and you're unlocking the quarterbacks. I want to step through each one of these. React for us. Baker Mayfield, number 1.
I love it. I do. I think it's sort of the guy that if you want to have a new identity for an organization, that's the guy to sort of build it around. And what's interesting to me is throughout this entire process, we've been thinking, oh, maybe it's Sam Darnold, or maybe it's even Josh Rosen. But I think the answers were in front of us the entire time. They bring in Jarvis Landry. They give him a big extension. He's not sort of a downfield vertical threat. He's more of your West Coast guy that's going to run pivots and shallows and crossers. And we're all thinking, oh, well, Todd Haley, obviously they want to be vertical, but they're building a West Coast type offense in front of our eyes. And who fits that? It's Baker Mayfield. And I think if you're going to have sort of the culture shift, if you're going to have the quarterback to come in and run that kind of offense, that's the guy you want. I mean, Rosen could do it, sure, but I think it's great. And the other thing was, Hugh Jackson's sort of Pied Piper comment about Baker Mayfield at their pro day. That should have told us again that they were in on this kid, that they liked this kid, and you can take the 6 feet and throw it up the window. The guy finds throwing lanes, and if you're going to be running a West Coast offense, the ball is going to be getting out of his hands quickly. So I love it. I think it's great.
You addressed it, but what about the culture shift for the NFL taking this kind of quarterback number 1 overall?
Well, I think, and so, Matt's written on this extensively, scout the asterisk, scout the exception. And Baker Mayfield is the tip of the new vanguard, I think, in the National Football League. I think as we get more coaches into the NFL ranks, whether they're as, quarterbacks coaches, offensive coordinators, someday head coaches. I mean, the most sought after name right now or in the next couple of years is going to be Lincoln Riley. We're getting these guys in that are going to be comfortable running these sort of hybrid open spread air raid-esque type offenses, because for so long you're getting these quarterbacks that have that skill set, and then offensive coordinators are trying to force them into, no, you're going to line up under center and you're going to drop back 7 steps and you're going to read the 15-yard out to the curl in the flat. No, these guys are coming in with a certain set of skill sets. So it's about time that the NFL sort of catches up to it, and some quarterbacks before didn't get that chance, but I think Baker Mayfield going number 1 overall is going to be the sign that, okay, more and more teams are going to open up to this style of play.
And I think it was Eric Galco who on my show said that the NFL is waking up to offensive coordinator, play caller is almost as important or maybe even more important than your quarterback. And it's the intersection of the two that is the commodity more than the quarterback is an absolute. I'll add, I like you mentioned Lincoln Riley, who I know anybody who's been following Baker Mayfield knows. I'll add Mike Norvell too from Memphis.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to see where Anthony Miller lands. And then and then we'll take another step forward to the Jets at that fork in the road. Rosen, maybe Darnold, who didn't expect to be there, Allen, and they go with Darnold. So now's your chance to talk to in the box next to you for all the Jets fans out there, Matt Batanti, and all the long-suffering Jets fans. How should they feel about this?
Let's put it this way. I'm a Patriots fan, even though I'm wearing a Texans jersey right now. And this is an unsettling pick from a Patriots fan's perspective because you're getting in Sam Darnold, a guy with tremendous upside. Yes, he has flaws. Yes, he has mechanical issues. Yes, he has footwork issues, which he's going to need to refine, especially for the offense, this sort of West Coast offense we expect them to run under Jeremy Bates. But you're getting a guy that like 5 years ago wasn't even playing the position. He was a linebacker in high school before he started playing quarterback as a sophomore. This is a kid who, unlike other quarterbacks who have come in with these sort of structural mechanical flaws, they're not set in stone with him. So he's going to have a chance to sort of develop and work out these flaws that he has. He can come in and run this offense quickly, although with guys like Bridgewater and Josh McCown in place, you don't have to rush him out there. He would be the youngest starting quarterback in NFL history if he starts week 1. So I don't think they do that, but you're getting in him a guy with the upside potential that is huge. And he does some things at an advanced level now that he hasn't gotten enough credit for. You look at anticipation throws, making some aggressive throws downfield. He's one of those guys that, yeah, he'll make a bad mistake and you'll wonder what he's doing playing the position. And then he'll come back 2 plays later and make a throw that other guys in this class aren't making, with the exception of maybe a Josh Rosen. And so for me, I think it's a great pick. You've got a glide path for him to start. I think it makes a ton of sense.
And maybe not the quarterback they anticipated being there when they traded up to number 3, but a quarterback that they would probably be happy to take. So we'll take a little break here to see the Dallas pick, and then I'm gonna toss it back to Matt Batanti to get his take on Quenton Nelson. But we'll see. And everything unanimously was pointing to Leighton Vander Esch here, but then we may talk to Dr. Gene about cervical issues because that was what was leaked. But Tony Pauline said that out of the 32 teams, 27 cleared Vander Esch, 5 flagged him, no one flunked him. Certainly Vander Esch, and if Cecil was here in his heart, he would love that he was an 8-man football star in Idaho. And, we shall see. Of course, the other possibility here, we may be going to Matt Waldman when we hear this pick, is if they take that first wide receiver off the board. Although I think there'll be wide receivers in the second and third day that make a lot of sense for them. So we'll see this pick, and then we'll get back to reviewing some of the picks as we go forward. And I know the one pick that will make Matt Waldman groan here. So we'll see if that's the pick. Well, while we're leading up to, because Cortland Sutton has been that guy, as we had a chance to ruminate on it, if it is
none of the above, it's Vander Esch.
It is,
yeah.
See, because you could, there it is, and Gene, tell us about your familiarity with this idea of players being flunked or being flagged or being cleared. How different medical staffs. I mean, according to Tony Pauline, 5 staffs flagged him, 27 didn't. And also the delicate nature of cervical issues as we're projecting these players' careers.
Yeah, there are going to be some differences in medical staffs across the league about different controversies. Are we more comfortable with certain cervical conditions? Are we more comfortable with certain knee cartilage issues, the bone-on-bone stuff we talked about with Sony Michel, a number of other things like that? Given what we heard, it makes it less likely that it seems like there's some impending concern with him. It sounds like there may be a condition like spinal stenosis where his spinal canal is a little bit narrow, and there's a lot of discussion about, exactly how much narrowing is there before you grow concerned that there might be something, something symptomatic later where it's harder to clear him to play. But this is a known issue. It was something that was known before he played this year. He played every game, didn't have anything symptomatic. It sounds like most teams decided to clear him. Having a team comfortable enough to take him in the first round tells us pretty much what we need to know. And it only takes one team, but knowing Tony Pauline is probably fairly accurate there when he's given a pretty specific number of 27 out of 32 teams that were not concerned enough to flag him on the board. But I don't know that we know specifically what it is. That's just me speculating about the stenosis issue. And you're correct. Anytime we're talking about any sort of spinal condition, there's a little bit of a concern there. But hopefully that's a non-issue. It's going to be interesting to see how they pair Vander Esch and Jalen Smith and Sean Lee. That's a quite athletic and the potential for really some kind of all-around linebacker core for all three of those guys. It's going to be interesting to see how you get all three of them on the field at the same time.
Bloom, we have ourselves a trade.
Ooh.
The Raiders acquired Martavis Bryant.
That's what Eric Stoner meant when he just texted me that Al Davis lives.
Yes. Yes. There's a great meme of Al Davis in a graveyard coming up out of the grave and raising his hand from Josh Norris at this point, too, on Twitter. You'll love.
And by the way, Eric Stoner, always with us in spirit. He said that Saquon is a bigger Reggie Bush, and I could quote him on that.
Yep, he can. That's a really good way to put it.
And the Justice looked like he was an informant in a drug cartel documentary.
Sounds about the tweets I get from him, too. I love it.
Did they say the terms of the Martavis Bryant trade?
Third round pick.
Yeah, third round.
More? They got a third? Wow.
So basically what you get for Derek Carr is you get a player who, obviously at his best can win the ball in the air, who can stretch the field for you. And now he gets a chance to prove that he's a full-time every down guy that can be relied upon. But at the same, the Steelers unload a guy that they weren't extremely happy with. Didn't feel like he was, probably mature enough to be the professional in their organization. And, they already have Juju Smith-Schuster and Antonio Brown. And, they feel like they've got a strong team that they can continue to build upon. So they get rid of a problem, and the Raiders feel like that maybe they inherit a player with a chip on his shoulder. And, if Martavis Bryant is about to find, kind of the ultimate test here, because a Gruden coach team, whether it's Jay or John, likes to grind you down to mash. And if you have what it takes, you're going to shine. If you don't, you're going to get spit out. So this is the ultimate test for him.
Yeah. And then look, the Steelers spent a 4th round pick on him in that great wide receiver draft of 2014. They get a 3rd round pick from him and get parts of 3 years of good production, and they stuck with him. And in some ways, they were rewarded for that, even though they didn't stick with him in the end. Detroit on the clock, and what's interesting here, I got to mention this because of my Q's roots. They got Paul Pasqualoni on the defensive side of the ball, who coached Harold Landry at Boston College. So we'll be interested to see what happens there as the pick is in. While we're waiting for that pick, Matt Batanti, Quenton Nelson, a lot of people had him as, some might have had him as the top player in this draft, period. Do you like the fit with the Colts, and how does he rate against some of the other top guards that broke into the top 10 that we've seen over the last 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I love the pick for the Colts. It gives them a ton of versatility. It's really all about moving Jack Mewhort back over to right tackle or finding a solution at the right tackle spot. They have a lot of pieces now. Now they could put Matt Slauson in at center if Ryan Kelly gets hurt again. They have Denzel Good, who could play 3 or 4 different positions possibly, but you'd probably want him backing up most likely. So I really like it. Quenton Nelson's a dominator. He's not like a, Jonathan Cooper type of prospect. He has legit anchor. He finishes blocks like he loves it. And, let me also shout out Mike McGlinchey going top 10 to the 49ers. And my personal mock got ripped apart, with this Baker Mayfield business at the top, but I did start to get these picks with the offensive line. And you look at the 49ers, Trent Brown is a big question mark. Joe Staley's getting old. Jimmy Garoppolo is your franchise. So why not take a guy who's 6'8", 320? project him at right tackle, maybe left one day. But there's also some good talent left on the board. I'm a big Isaiah Wynn fan. I'm a big Will Hernandez fan. So I want to see where these guys go. And James Daniels.
Frank Ragnow.
Not to project.
That's the next pick. He's the next pick.
Everybody says that's the next pick. So we'll see. Maybe I'll pick another one up with that one. But I think the interior of the offensive line is surprisingly strong. I had 10 guards going in the top 100, guards or centers, and some tackles that you could consider guards. There's not a lot of tackles, but there's a ton of good guards this year.
Yeah, guys, Connor Williams, who I think was invited to the draft. We got the Lions selection here.
There he is. Frank Ragnow.
Oh, wow.
Speak of the devil. So this is a player that rose up because of, I would say, spark scores in the 90%. Tremendous film. You don't really know where you're going to play him, but where can't he play, at that point? And, they could even be looking at him as a Riley Rife replacement one day. He's got potential.
So it used to be, a 6'5" center. How has scouting offensive linemen changed since you and I started doing this, 10, 15 years ago?
I mean, there's traditionalists. I'm still not really comfortable with the idea of a 6'5", 6'6" center. I feel like it's the leverage problems when you face up against a Don Terry Poe or a Vita Vea are problematic. You'll read a Frank Ragnow scouting report. They'll talk about how high he gets sometimes. So that's his downside. But you can coach that out of guys. It's a totally fixable issue. I think now you're getting to the point where everything's bigger. Everyone's getting bigger, so I still prefer them to be under 6'5", but I'm like old school at this point. Everybody's everywhere at this point. And NFL coaches look at a guy and they all about the conversion. They'll be like, you've done something your whole life. I think you can do this other thing because I'm an NFL coach. And that's why they get paid. And they'll like half the time they're right too. So I'm not trying to say that as an insult.
And Ragnow was actually linked almost unanimously to the Bengals. The idea being that they traded down from 12 to 21, got Cordy Glenn, and then they're going to fix that center spot. And there's still James Daniels and even Billy Price, who with that pec issue at the combine, it sounds like he's going to be okay. But let's get back to Mark Schofield and the quarterbacks here, because Buffalo is going to join Cleveland and now not Philadelphia, although Philadelphia fans might have other issues for their therapist. Buffalo fans are going to need a therapist, especially those that are in the know and have been following all the draft coverage. So you've got the Buffalo fans on the couch right now. You've studied all these quarterbacks with a fine-tooth comb. Give them the truth about Josh Allen.
Let's put it this way. There is a path to Josh Allen being a good quarterback in the National Football League. There is a glide path to that happening. It is a narrow one than for some of the other guys. I think when you look at Josh Allen, you look at the fact that he has sort of the size, he has the arm, he has the athletic ability that coaches sometimes drool over. You watch him down in Mobile. He can make splash throws. He can do throws and make plays with his arm that nobody else can make in this class. The problem is the things that he can do are such a minute and minuscule aspect of NFL offenses today. When you look at NFL offenses, for example, Drew Brees, 91% of his throws were 20 yards or shorter. Jared Goff, 91% of his throws last year were 21 yards or shorter. The fact that Josh Allen can deliver deep down the field with high velocity, it's such a small part of what NFL teams are doing. Now, that being said, look, they do have a plan in place. They're looking at Jacksonville, the team that just beat them in the playoffs. They're looking at establishing the run somehow with an offensive line. I don't know how they're going to do that, and maybe Matt can shine some light on that aspect of it. But they've got LaShawn McCoy. They've got a good defense, which they just made a little bit better with Edmunds, who's going to be the perfect middle linebacker in that defense. They want to be the next Jacksonville Jaguars, where you can establish the run, win with defense, and slowly get A.J. McCarron to turn the reins over to Josh Allen, and then have a run-heavy, vertical, I think, based pass and attack. Even though Brian Daboll is more of an Aaron Perkins guy, they'll do some vertical stuff with him, working off of play action when they finally get Josh Allen onto the field. They're gonna need to be patient. That's the final key here. There's gonna have to be organizational patience. There's gonna have to be fan base patience. There's gonna have to be ownership patience, because if you run Josh Allen out there in week 1, good luck. Like, he needs time.
Yeah, well, since you gave a great transition there, Mark, Matt, how mad should Bills fans be that they lost 3 starters on the offensive line but they have Deion Dawkins, they have Ryan Groy, I don't know, Vlad Ducasse, former Jet. I don't know what they're going to do with that other guard spot that opened up when Incognito was tired. Can Dawkins and Groy at least fill those big shoes?
I know they really like Ryan Groy a lot more than most people give credit for. I think Ryan Groy will start possibly at center or left guard. They have their own ideas. I thought Will Hernandez would have been a great fit for Incognito. You swap him in, but the draft doesn't go that way. Sometimes I think there's still the Bills have a lot of ammo left, so I don't want to say what exactly they're going to do. I bet you they get some kind of starter for the offensive line before the top 100 picks are over. Vlad Ducasse is an interesting name, not to make your 2018 draft about the a draft that happened 12 years ago, but talking about a guy that they call them country strong. That's what Vlad Ducasse is. He's country strong. The guy had no technique, went to UMass. He's from Haiti. One of these guys that didn't play football, growing up in Pop Warner, and he's still there 8 years later. And he did start over John Miller last year. He won that job legit at right guard, and he works good in the phone booth. He's a power zone guy, zone scheme. Power scheme. You don't want him to get to the second level. You just want him to face up and take care of the interior alignment. So I think they like what they have better than other people do. That's my impression.
Gene, Billy Price, and we see that the Bengals do get their center, and it's really seemed like that was the plan. You trade down from 12 to 21, you get Cordy Glenn to shore up one of those tackle spots because a way he didn't work out. So now you have your center. Center's been a very rough spot, but they drafted a player, Gene, who tore his pec at the combine. There's talk he's going to be okay by training camp, but how much should that worry, or should it worry Bengals fans at all?
Not much. It sounds like it was a partial tear. I don't recall whether or not probably not likely something that's going to require surgery. He's had his surgeon already essentially say that his orthopedic doctor already say that he's going to be cleared and shouldn't have any difficulty being ready to go this year. So not likely to be an issue.
We have a trade.
Yeah, and they trade down again. The Ravens, I was going to say Ozzie Newsome can get his Alabama Crimson Tide receiver, Calvin Ridley, who I feel like every mock through February had Calvin Ridley as a 16 pick, but now, no. Tennessee moves up.
So is New England going to get him?
Lamar Jackson.
Get him?
Right. Or could, and you wonder if Lamar Jackson's not the pick at 23, does he fall out of the first round?
Yeah, or the team trades up.
Yeah. I think that's more likely that a team comes back into or New England at 31. I mean, they're still lurking there.
Why would it make sense? Just while we're talking and
I'm team
how would it make sense to pass on him at 23 and take him at 31?
I'm team get your guy, and if he's your guy, whether it's one, first of all, like the notion of Cleveland, tonight, passing on a QB at 1 and seeing who gets Don't let another team decide who your quarterback's going to be. It's too important of a position. So, if New England decides, they're going to roll the dice and draft, Sam Hubbard and, make me have to excuse myself for a few minutes. And then hope that somehow Lamar Jackson's at 31. No, don't let another team come get your guy. If you've identified this player to be your quarterback, draft him at 23. It's that important of a position to do it.
And Hubbard actually was heavily linked to the Titans at 25 with Mike Vrabel. Although the trade up to me says Rashawn Evans, the last of those hyper athletic off ball linebackers.
And that would make sense because you think maybe New England does that at 23. And if you're worried about that, you got to get ahead of Bill Belichick.
So while we wait, and it'll be great to watch you sweat. We'll get to watch me sweat at 28 here coming up with the Steelers. But Josh Rosen to Arizona. Josh Rosen with Mike McCoy. Josh Rosen as an understudy for Sam Bradford. Josh Rosen with, I'm not quite sure he's going to be throwing to next year. And Matt Waldman and I think others have said that here's your best pure passer of this class, yet he was the 4th quarterback off the board. What did you see when you watched him?
I mean, I loved him on tape. I mean, as far as between the lines, on the field, the stuff we get to see on film day in and day out, playing and play out, driving and drive out, this was quarterback 1. He's the refined pocket passer that's got everything you want, regardless of scheme. If you want to run a vertical passing game, okay. You want to run a more time and rhythm offense, he's your guy. You want to go West Coast, sure. he can fit it all. He can do it all. Are there questions about sort of his athleticism and ability to sort of create off structure? I think there are some, but I think they're a little bit overblown. I think if you watch his footwork, I did a video in the last couple of days before the draft showing some examples of him sort of moving around in the pocket, very similar to Tom Brady in a sense where he's not going to be athletic enough to create off structure, but he's got the footwork that can keep and extend plays alive, that can move around in the pocket. Makes sense given his tennis background, that he can still, keep himself upright and make throws in those pressure situations. I think when you put it all together, what's interesting about this, the potential marriage, when you think of Mike McCoy and Josh Rosen, one of the knocks on Rosen was that he was too intelligent, which doesn't make much sense to me sitting here tonight. But here we are. What's gotten Mike McCoy run out of some towns before? His offenses were sometimes viewed as too complex. Well, there you go. You get the quarterback deemed too smart, the coach deemed too smart for his own good. You put them together and maybe magic happens.
Yeah, magic. We'll see if the Tennessee can make some magic happen. While we're waiting for the Tennessee pick, Matt Patonti, Colton Miller was, I don't want to say polarizing, because I felt like there was some consensus among draft Twitter that he wasn't worth a first-round pick, that no matter what athletic traits he had, his tape should have disqualified him, and yet he goes number 15. Now, this was a weak offensive tackle class. We saw McGlinchey moved up to 9. Like as I recounted earlier on the show, Gil Brandt was asked for who would be a surprise in the top 10. Peter King took it as who's your surprise prediction. He said McGlinchey, and ended up being right, even though it was misheard. But Colton Miller, number 15, do you at least see why the Raiders would do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am not a huge fan of just relying on the tape for these guys because they're unfinished projects and they're raw lumps of clay to be molded. And I'm a big fan of Brian O'Neill from Pittsburgh for similar reasons. Like, you take a guy that can run a 4.8 at 310. What's the problem with that? I mean, you want to look at film. Orlando Brown's got some okay film. Like, I want him nowhere near my team. Like, these physical attributes matter. And it's funny we were talking about Rosen because I feel like the internet was so all in on Rosen, and Rosen was not being protected well by Miller. If you want to break it down, who is giving up these pressures in the Cal game? Who is getting Rosen concussed? It's Colton Miller. So he became like a scapegoat in a certain way, but he's not got the level of coaching. Some of these guys, they just need to get in with the real offensive line coach, the Mushroom Society. He's going to be fine. I give him a couple of years. You got to remember about the offensive line. Very few of these guys start right away. The ones that do start right away, like Cam Robinson last year, they have up and down seasons. They're not going to make the Pro Bowl day one. They're going to have, mistakes. And I think Colton Miller's value there. And it's not a popular statement, but there it is.
I think we've got two perfect guys to comment about this since you brought it up, Matt, which is the fact that he didn't get great coaching. I remember one of the biggest knocks on Brett Hundley when he was coming out was that he wasn't very good in the pocket and that Jim Mora didn't allow him to make calls with protections and things like that. But it seemed like that Jim Mora Jr. also his coaching staff set up Hundley to fail in a lot of respects because he didn't get to make checks. He didn't get to make adjustments, and he was basically bombed out of his gourd by defenses that were like, we can make the chain, we can blitz, and you can't do anything about it. And good luck to you. I mean, if there's a coach who deserves, to be honest, I hate to say it like this, but why not? I mean, if there's a coach who deserves to be sitting in front of a camera right now instead of being a coach of a major college team, it's probably the guy who hasn't given Brett Hundley and Josh Rosen a chance to be the players they were. And a lot of that's the offensive line. So I'd love for Matt and Mark to comment on that if what I say makes any sense.
Let me just say this, and then I'll defer to Matt for a second. But with Brett Hundley, they had one cadence, one snap count.
Yeah.
I mean, I rest my case. Like, you're not going to protect your guy if you can, as a defense, just know, okay, it's on this. We can go too. You get no advantage offense.
And the Packers were shocked how fast he learned the offense as a rookie. And they literally said that after he led the preseason in quarterback rating. And while he hasn't panned out, didn't do great this past year, again, the fact that you make that transition that quickly, even in the preseason, is a statement that Jim Mora Jr., I mean, he's bagged on his players too. I mean, I just don't, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to wrap up, Cole Miller, I think that entire program, for them to be 5-6 and fighting to be bowl eligible against a 5-6 Cal at the end of the season is pretty embarrassing. And for Josh Rosen to be the 5-star Elite 11 quarterback, and not just the guys who are in this class, there's like Soso Jamabo and all sorts of guys on that UCLA roster. They should not have been 5-6. That was an under-coached squad all around.
Yeah, and then you get into some. It might seem like really basic, and I'm not even using this to knock Josh Rosen, but I believe, and I'm going to mention Uncle Chaps for the second time tonight, which Uncle Chaps is the man. Quarterbacks that aren't winners in college aren't winners in the pros, and I'm not saying that. I mean, just Josh Rosen. I hope for the sake of Arizona and for Rosen, and I think Rosen could be that guy. I don't think there's a quarterback. I think Jay Cutler was the last one to test this, and we saw how Jay Cutler's career went. It was Rashawn Evans that the Titans did trade up for, and I think Evans was a little banged up this year, but athletically, and another Alabama player, isn't it great? I was thinking Alabama, Calvin Ridley for Baltimore, and Ozzie Newsome, and it was an Alabama player that goes at number 22. And we have the number 23 pick. Mark, if it is Lamar Jackson, put aside your Patriots fan, or don't put aside your Patriots fan here, and just your quarterback scouting. What should we think?
I mean, I think one, as a Patriots fan, I'll say this. I can't believe you guys let this happen. Okay, NFL, I can't believe you let it happen.
I can't.
Because
we're so sorry for you.
I know. It's brutal being me. But no, I mean, I think, look, putting the objective glasses on for a second, you're getting in a quarterback who has some schematic familiarity with what the New England Patriots do right now on offense. He's been running a version of the Aaron Perkins system, which the Patriots have been running since before, Tom Brady was Tom Brady. I mean, this is the offensive system that they've been running. It's named after former Patriots coaches. And so there's schematic familiarity there. There are issues that Lamar Jackson has as a passer right now. There are some footwork and mechanical issues. There's some ball placement inconsistency, which does have to get ironed out. He had a very wide base in high school. Eric Edholm over at Pro Football Weekly did a great piece talking about had a wide base in high school. They tried to narrow his base, and he overcompensated in the other direction. So they got to fix that. But he gets to sit behind Tom Brady. He gets to sort of ease himself into the National Football League and fix that stuff. And if we're talking about Baker Mayfield being the tip of the new offensive vanguard, well, the Patriots seem to be, if they make the pick with Lamar, also ahead of that curve as well, because you're getting the guy that's going to be the next sort of wave of quarterbacks that we anticipate seeing happen.
Okay,
so they're going to draft Sam Hubbard. So yeah,
right. So as a quick aside, this is one of those, explain it to me like I'm a 4-year-old or something. People that watch football, all of us, and not necessarily people that obsess about football like us, you would watch Lamar Jackson, you would see his incredible athleticism, his playmaking ability, his more than good enough passing ability, whatever lens you look at it through. Why 4 quarterbacks in the top 10 and then we're on pick 23 in Lamar Jackson? Like trying to put yourself in the shoes of the NFL. You said the NFL, how did they let this happen? Well, why? How is the NFL letting this happen?
I think in a sense, one, when your mortgage is on the line, when your kids, school tuition is on the line, it's safer as a decision maker to sort of say, okay, we're going to draft the Josh Rosens or the Josh Allens because we know that they can do some things with their arm and from the pocket and things like that have worked from time to time and tend to work over time in the National Football League. And when you look at Lamar Jackson, while he can do those things, and I think that, the fact that he can't be a pocket passer is just a misplaced criticism with him. I think you're also trying to incorporate how you can use his athleticism, and teams have sometimes struggled to do that. You need somebody that's going to have some creativity as an offensive play caller rather than going down the safe road. And so I think it's one of those situations where you almost make the safe pick, or you think it's the safe pick, and you overthink it too much rather than draft a good football player. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing tonight, is watching teams draft good football players. And Lamar Jackson is a good football player, and he's the ultimate equalizer from an offensive perspective. He can mask and take care of many sins up front because you can get him on a free rusher and an A-gap blitz, and he can escape that. You can get unblocked guys off the edge. He can escape that. Other guys can't do that.
Isaiah Wynn.
and this is where Mark, I had you reassure Matt Batanti. Now, Matt Batanti, it's your
I mean,
turn.
I'll say that I like Isaiah Wynn. I love
yeah.
Isaiah Wynn, and I've talked about him being a potential Patriot target. So I'm okay with it. I'm fine with it. But what could have been?
Visionary, and it still could be. But Isaiah Wynn, and Matt, you were saying there's a lot of great interior line. We've seen 3 out of the last 4 picks now, interior linemen. Wynn may end up being the best of them. I guess we got to step through all these guys, but start with Wynn since he's the pick on the clock right now.
Yeah, Isaiah Wynn's got great film. He played left tackle at Georgia. I mean, Matt Waldman's probably saw as much film as any of them than I have. But I mean, I like his versatility. I feel like he can play almost any position. And that's what the Patriots, value. And on both sides of the football, they want a guy that they can plug in almost anywhere. And I always say this, but if Cordy Glenn can play left tackle,
yes,
and why can't Isaiah Wynn play left tackle? Exactly. I mean, I remember, a lot of it's opportunity. It's what you believe these guys can do. And they lose Nate Solder. I'm not saying that they're going to plug in Isaiah Wynn first day, but if you look at their depth chart, it's a who's who of whateversville. So he definitely could win that job or any other on that line. And I think he's a great pick. I actually had him going 16 to the Ravens, as a lot of people did, just as a compliment to Ozzie Newsome, because Ozzie Newsome seems to get these gems. And I like Isaiah Wynn a lot. You would hear a lot more about him if Quenton Nelson was in this draft.
I agree. And it's funny that you said that, because I wrote about Cordy Glenn, I think for Bleacher Report. That's not long ago. And I agree. I remember when they were saying he can't play left tackle, and the Georgia connection here. I remember watching him and saying, why can't he play left tackle? And he's been an outstanding left tackle. Now he'll be a left tackle for the Bengals. Panthers on the clock. No wide receivers gone yet. Matt Waldman, does this surprise you that we're 24 picks in and no wide receivers are gone?
No, because right now none of them really fit the mold of that Julio Jones, AJ Green, Des Bryant type of player that they tend to value still from an old school perspective. And they've seen players in recent drafts come off the board a little bit later who've made a high impact as that spread, slot outside receiver hybrid like. And the fact that the Cowboys themselves were, at least during the foolish phase of the month, say that they saw Cortland Sutton as a second round pick. He was probably the closest example to being that kind of high end player who matches that prototype. So when you look at the fact that there really isn't that traditional wide receiver one, it makes total sense. And I'll just add you asked Mark about Lamar Jackson. I'll put it to it this way. Imagine, I think the NFL owners look at a quarterback like Lamar Jackson in the same way that you have ignorant coworkers in an office scenario or classmates in a school looking at someone who's hearing impaired and think that they just have to talk louder and slower to them when they read lips perfectly fine. And I think that's kind of what happens with the GMs, with how that they look at certain caricatures of players. And they're looking at Lamar Jackson as a caricature of what he actually is. He's the best pocket player, not the most accurate, but the best pocket player maneuvering from pressure in this class. And they're talking to him like, do you understand what we're talking about? Just because maybe his process for learning was a little bit different. But this is a guy that sat down, pretty much from his freshman year throughout now, who's done, virtual reality work with his offense and has learned the ins and outs of a really fine pro offense from a play caller who was considered one of the best in the NFL when he was here. So it just tells you, again, these are baby boomer generation people who are still stuck on Terry Bradshaw and Roger Staubach. The fact that we can still bring out Troy Aikman and Roger Staubach and Phil Simms as quarterback experts on the game, and we're marveling over how good Tony Romo is when you probably could bring Kurt Warner out there and a whole bunch of other younger quarterbacks and let them pick apart the game. They made Tony Romo look like a savant, last year, and everybody's overwhelmed as far as analysts. I think that's the same thing going on here. It's just the mentality that is so very old school that it's as ridiculous as it's unimaginably ridiculous. And that's where we're at.
Phil Simms loved Josh Allen. How much of it, and anyone feel free to jump in, how much of it could be the way he handled the draft process, not hiring an agent and not really marketing himself?
I think his agent being his mother or whatever situation that is, it gives some owners pause or some GMs pause, just because it shouldn't be that hard to get someone on the phone. It shouldn't be that hard to work out the draft slot, contracts. But I think that some people are more comfortable dealing with super agents, guys who are representing 10 of the guys in the first round, and they know that deal's going to get done in 2 days. How long is this deal going to get done?
Yeah, and here's the other question, though, that's interesting, the other side of it, because you're probably right. But the other side of the question that people have been talking about is, what if he did this purposely, knowing that he didn't want to go to an early team that was going to run him to death? And his mother, who's someone who hasn't been that, she hasn't been an Eli Apple mom. She's basically like, I don't want any interviews. Don't talk to me about anything. I'm just trying to protect my kid, and has been very behind the scenes about stuff. What if it's more like, let's keep everything in the background. We'd rather him fall and work behind somebody who really wants him and get some time for development, as opposed to running him to death and saying, you're Robert Griffin Jr., you're Michael Vick. And look at that. Now we have DJ Moore, who is going to be selected by the Carolina Panthers. Your
first wide receiver off the board. And Matt Waldman, I'm going to toss it back to you on more, but I just want to say too, and I think it was it was one of the Cardinals guys. Maybe it was Seth Cox or Blake Murphy. I'm sorry if I'm not remembering exactly. He said, I have a theory that I think it was Seth Cox that
was Cox.
Jackson. Yeah, Lamar Jackson is actually has a plan here to determine where he's going to play. And it's interesting because you can watch Jackson and you can watch Rosen as two different ways to, what I would say, hack the draft process, because this is where some of my political leanings, which aren't usually that hidden, but sometimes they are, there's a take on the draft that it's basically illegal collusion. When any of us graduated from college, we got to go and apply at different employers and negotiate our own terms. No one told us you have to work for this company. No one told us you have to sign this contract. And the idea is you're supposed to try to get drafted as high as you can. But what about trying to get drafted someplace where you're wanted and the real you is wanted, not the you that you try to put on in a job interview to get hired? I think Josh Rosen showed us one way to do that.
Maybe he's the smartest quarterback in this class?
Right.
That can't be.
Right. DJ Moore, Carolina Panther. I know that I'm not as high on Moore as some. I know that you seem to become higher on him the more you dug in. What did the Panthers just get?
Yeah, they got a player who actually is going to be able to run routes in the middle of the field. He has that very all-important ability to bend at the waist and do it very suddenly so that he can drop that weight quickly in and out of hard cuts. So he's going to be a good timing route slot player who I think can grow into an outside receiver. In fact, as I'm watching NFL Network right now, I'm watching a guy, I can't hear him talking, but he's one of my absolute all-time favorite receivers, who's probably talking about DJ Moore and saying he reminds me a little bit of me. He just can't catch the fade route and get separation right now at the level that he needs to. And I don't know if that's what he's saying, but that's what my analysis would be if I were like lip syncing, and filling in for the voice of Steve Smith, is that he has to develop a little bit better plan, because right now all he does is dip that outside shoulder and try and outrun people with that burst that he has, when he needs to develop a certain variety of footwork and hand maneuvers to be able to set up the fade routes and some of the perimeter routes that he does not do as well on as he should. But man, get this guy on curl routes and dig routes and comebacks and out routes and crossing routes and slants, and you're not going to tackle him with the first guy. A lot of times there's going to be some big linebackers in the NFL who might actually be a little surprised at how hard it is to wrap this dude up. People compare him to Golden Tate a lot, and I can certainly see some of that, but I think he's a much better hands catcher than Tate ever was. And I actually think he's a little bit more, he's got a little better balance than Golden Tate in terms of being able to make the catches. And since the Carolina Panthers tend to be pretty good at using their receivers in the inside, in the middle of the field, and the way that they can maybe move things around, it might be interesting. But this also is very fitting because Norv Turner worked this guy out. and Norv Turner is the recycled offensive coordinator of the year, in the NFL. And one thing we know is that he's a stickler for route running. He wants all his young guys to run every route, and he came away impressed with DJ Moore. So you can tell that this was a Norv Turner pick all the way of who he wanted. And that's a good sign, because we've seen what happens when a team that has Norv Turner picks receivers that they like, but Norv isn't so high on. So if it gets the Turner seal of approval, this may be your wide receiver one in your rookie drafts, at least if you're looking for the first year or two for turnaround.
And we'll see. I mean, there's a lot. We may see, Matt, it wouldn't surprise me if a receiver that goes in the late second or third is our number one fantasy receiver in this class, just because of landing spot. But this is a good landing spot for Moore in terms of opportunity. And I was shocked when he measured in at 6 feet, because he looks like a running back to me. And I think that's not a bad thing at wide receiver these days. And like you said, it's the way he can drop his weight. He's tenacious after the catch, and he plays bigger at the catch point. And he's got a good burst. He maybe doesn't have true long speed, but and as you pointed out when you and I talked about him, there's room for growth in his game too. And he's like Darnold, one of those very young players. We're waiting for Baltimore's pick, and they can still get Calvin Ridley.
Just a quick ad, Bloom. Chris Wessling quoted this as we were talking. If you want to know the truth about how I feel, they have never been able to replace me until now, Steve Smith. So that's what he was saying apparently on the air. So there we go.
Big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for the Baltimore pick, Matt Batanti, just anything else that struck you about this first round, or what you're looking forward to the end of the first round later on in the draft? Just, you've been following the draft closely for a long time, and we've seen a lot of changes. And this one was one of the most uncertain going in, and we learned a lot tonight.
Yeah, I mean, we hustled right by it, but the Billy Price pick at the Cincinnati, that was actually a pretty decent pick. It might be seen as a panic pick because a lot of people didn't have Billy Price in the first round, but the guy started, I think, 54 games at Ohio State. That's about as legit as it gets when it comes to the legacy. I think Billy Price isn't quite a Nick Mangold level prospect, but he's just a small step below, almost instant starter. To go back another pick to the Lions, taking Ragnow, Graham Glasgow, who was their center at the end of the year, could be shifted back to left guard. So when you're looking at these picks for the offensive line, you always got to think about who can they move, who did they draft, and then who can they move based on that draft. So I mean, I'm loving this draft. I like how quickly it's going. I mean, just say that on a personal note, I love it when they show the families celebrating. Leighton Vander Esch's celebration in Boise State, I also have it on mute, but you can just see the joy of these people's faces, how happy they were. When Baker Mayfield redid the Favre pick with the jorts, like, I love that. That's what the draft is about. And when they show like the war room and everybody's in a suit and they're clapping, I'm not as much into that. I really would rather see more of these guys' bedrooms and their parents, and because this is a long road for these guys, and this is a big moment for them. And as we follow the draft and you meet these guys and you interview them, and they become like real people. Now they're not just under helmets. So I'm happy for everybody tonight. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I agree. And when Matt, when you and I first met back on the road at the Senior Bowl and Shrine Game, that was something that became very apparent. And it's the intensity of all the people that they're standing on the shoulders of. So there's family members, there's girlfriends, there's friends, there's coaches, there's mentors, there's teachers, there's, it takes a village for a player to get to this point. And every one of these journeys starts when it seems so unlikely. I mean, I know there's some of these players who's like sons of NFL players, but for the most part, these journeys begin at a point that it seems not just unlikely, but impossible. And Hayden Hurst goes to the Baltimore. I don't know what I think.
Todd Heap.
Yeah. Well,
He's 25. I know that much.
Yeah, and he wasn't he was a pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates who won again today.
I mean, did the Orioles just draft him? I mean,
right.
Look at the bullpen home.
Right. Well, and what's interesting about him, speaking of these stories, and they have it up there on the screen, he was a pitcher for the Pirates, and he, I think, hit someone in the face. Yeah. Was that what it was?
Yeah, he got the yips. Yeah,
and he lost his nerve. And football, you can get hit in the face too. Hopefully, you're hitting some guys in the face. But just to just to finish this point, because I think it's important, and I think Matt, you brought it up, and Charles brought it up earlier about the human story here, and I really do feel like, again, not to venture slightly into politics, but this is one of the last true outposts of the American dream, where if you work hard enough and you're good enough, you can make it. And there's lots of unbelievably unlikely stories that we're seeing culminate. And it's been the vision of this night that drove these stories and these journeys. And there's a massive, like, emotional atomic bombs are being exploding in these people's lives with this moment. And it's good to, instead of analyze it for a second, recognize that. Waldman, Hayden Hurst, tight end 1. I mean, I know that I saw the Saints being associated with him, like they couldn't trade up for a quarterback or Marcus Davenport. It was hard to see him as a top tight end on this board.
Well, you know, it was hard for me to see Hunter Henry as a top tight end off of board a couple of years ago. Even though he's talented, I just thought that he was a bit uninspiring of a pick. And I still look at him after last year and feel like that he's benefiting from a scheme more than he is a high-end talent. That doesn't mean he's not a starter talent and a good one, but I think Hayden Hurst is kind of along those lines. He's very quick. I think that he understands how to run. You know, you can see him run between the tackles at times at Clemson, at South Carolina, in a way where you see fluid athletic ability. And I think that he didn't play in a great offensive system that could have showcased his skills a little bit more. So I like what he has in terms of, you know, ability to catch the ball. It's going to take a while for him to become really a full-fledged blocker, but I think most of these tight ends are that way these days. So you're not really looking at him to be a blocker. And to me, would I say that that's a great fit? Would I want to do that? No, absolutely not. But if the Ravens feel like they have a plan on how to use him and split him outside, they get a more athletic player. They get a player that they thought Max Williams was going to be in terms of a receiver. So we'll see how that works out. But I love what we're watching here at least I'm watching on NFL, network, with they're showing Lamar Jackson and Falcons have the picks in.
Showing it on Fox too.
Steelers, Jim Wexell, longtime Steelers beat writer, saying he thinks Jesse Bates or Justin Reed, which were picks that maybe were telegraphed if the Steelers for safety, or Lamar Jackson. The dream is still alive. The dream is still alive.
It would be great. Or Jacksonville getting him if Pittsburgh doesn't.
And that's Eric Stoner. Eric Stoner is on my phone here saying he's going to fall to us.
I would lose my mind. That would be terrific for them. That'd be another great spot.
And I think this Falcons pick is going to be Taven Bryan. Just feels like a Dan Quinn guy. We talked about this earlier on the show. But it makes so much sense for Jacksonville because Lamar Jackson, you don't want to play him this year ideally. Maybe you put him in some package plays like the Steelers did with Cordell Stewart to help you win games and have an element of surprise and take up defensive preparation time. But you have Blake Bortles signed this year. If you release Blake Bortles next year, it'll cost you $5 or $6 million if you're ready for Lamar Jackson, or you have them both and maybe Bortles backs him up. But this is going to be fascinating. We've talked a lot about Lamar Jackson. Mark, there was another quarterback, Mason Rudolph, that has been talked about as a potential name that we should watch for in these last few picks, especially if a team trades back into the first. Do you think he's deserving of a first-round pick?
Yeah, in a vacuum, no. I think sort of in today's economics of the National Football League, where if you're a team, I theorized this the other day for Pro Football Weekly in a piece, where if you're a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars and, you've got Blake Bortles right now who costs, he's like 4% of your cap right now, but that's going to take a big leap in 2019 when he's due, I think, $19 million. You might want to make the move to get a guy that's going to come in and not start right away, but you can move on to a more cost-effective option at the quarterback position and still build around that defense. And those guys are going to have to get paid soon. So you can make that kind of move. And I think Mason Rudolph would be somewhat of a pretty decent fit for that offense because they're going to build it around, the running game and Fournette and play action and some vertical throws and scheme some stuff. I think Lamar Jackson would be a good fit too. So I think for a team that's looking to get a potential cost-controlled quarterback with an option for a fifth year, Mason Rudolph would make some sense. I wouldn't be surprised to say, if the Giants, if they've, gone with Barkley, if they decide, look, we're worried about Eli, let's get in and get that, rookie cross-control deal with an option for the fifth year. I think that would make some sense too. Now, all that being said, because of the economics making sense in the first round. Purely as a quarterback, I'm not so sure about it, him being a first round pick, because, I always walked away from watching him somewhat underwhelmed. And I know that's weird to say about one of the best passers in terms of, statistics in collegiate football history. But I felt like he could throw the deep ball well. He could do some timing and rhythm stuff to the sideline when he sees off coverage. If he sees, the corners playing off, he'll throw that comeback route, and you can anticipate that flare fairly well. But anytime he had to really make throws between the hashes or between the numbers, when he had to sort of dial up velocity, it always seemed like the ball wasn't where it needed to be when it needed to be there. He would miss some throws high. It would seem like his release point was off. So I think he has some work to do. I always felt like I was expecting more from him, and maybe that's sort of my own lens on him, but I just felt like I wanted there to be more. There wasn't. He might have a nice floor as a long-term backup spot starter, worst case scenario, but, I just wanted to see more from him.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. We're back to Seattle on the clock, and maybe they can't get Isaiah Wynn, Waldman, but they could get Will Hernandez. And Rudolph, we'll see. And, again, looking for these trade ups back into the first could absolutely be for a quarterback. Makes a lot of sense because of the financial impact, and I agree with Mason Rudolph being a little bit underwhelming, and not seeing the skills and traits that you would necessarily see with those numbers. Calvin Ridley to Atlanta, Matt.
I love it. I think it's a great pick. And because what's been confounding for me watching the Falcons for the past how many ever odd years for football guys is that Matt Ryan is a terrific timing passer who doesn't have a single player who runs a complete route tree. I mean, even Julio Jones doesn't run a complete route tree. So why would you they haven't had one since Roddy White. Roddy White was one of the best route runners in the NFL who could basically on 3rd and 12, win an out route or a comeback route against double coverage, and it was impossible to defend, but everyone's ooh and on over Julio Jones when it was Roddy White who started drinking that offense. And if you really look at this team ever since, it was great that Shanahan was able to do what he did, but they didn't really have the full-fledged talents there. And Sarkisian obviously wanted to have Taylor Gabriel run more complete routes and Mohamed Sanu run more complete routes, and whatever you want to say about his ability to craft a game plan and call plays, you can still look at this offense and say those guys weren't it on that level. I thought Gabriel had some potential here, but you get in Calvin Ridley, a guy who can earn separation off the line of scrimmage. He is someone that runs excellent routes with great suddenness. He's going to be able to make it very difficult for teams to double cover Julio Jones if, those crazy rumors about Julio Jones yesterday were, had any merit. I think he's staying in town. But even if Julio Jones gets banged up once every, 50 plays and has to sit out for a series or two during a game, Ridley can carry that team a little bit eventually. So it's a really nice pick for him, even though a lot of people are making fun of his age and saying that his skin's too tight. I've never heard the skin's too tight thing. The skin's too tight. The knees are too narrow. He's too smart. That his mom's intelligent and playing us in the draft process, whatever it is that they're making excuses about nowadays. But you look at Ridley and you have to understand that Matt Ryan needs that kind of player, and they haven't had it. And it makes this offense not as fully dimensional when they don't have that complete route runner. Now they get it. They get a guy for the future. And yeah, the age thing, I always laugh about that. To me, it's like the draft kind of decides that for you. If he's too old, they probably won't draft him that early. If they draft him early, they expect him to start early. And as long as the skills match up there, sure, maybe you don't get that extra year or two, at that next contract or whatever it is that you're doing from bargaining. But if you're trying to get a first-round pick, you're trying to get somebody who's going to play right away and make an impact. And this dude's going to do that. He may not win, after the, with the ball in the air above the rim and do all those wide receiver one things that you want to see Julio Jones do, but they already have that. They need the other guy, and suddenly they've got that. That's a terrific pick for them.
Yeah, more of a technician than Mohamed Sanu. I thought he was a really easy evaluation in some ways. As you said, he's not going to win the contested balls. I didn't see him as a particularly creative or elusive player after the catch. He's got good speed, but the route running, the creation of separation was there. And the age thing, I think, is a little bit overblown. I guess it informs us on top end in the range of outcomes. DJ Moore has a higher top end at 20, producing as he did than Calvin Ridley does doing the same thing. Although Ridley was outstanding as a freshman in Alabama. We're waiting for the Seattle pick. I don't know if they're trying to find a trade partner or they're trying to decide which offensive lineman how they're going to throw away another pick on an offensive lineman in the first round. I don't know. We'll see. Speaking of Batanti, you mentioned it. There's a lot of good offensive line prospects in this class. We've already seen 2 centers go. James Daniels could make it 3. Will Hernandez, if he's not a first round pick, teams are going to regret it. There's a lot of other good names too. Tell me some of your favorite offensive linemen that we might hear in the next 6 picks, and we'll certainly hear tomorrow night.
Yeah, I mean, I said before, I like Brian O'Neill from Pittsburgh. He's another one of these like converted tight end types. Runs a 4.8. I like the tight end conversion to tackle. I just like how a lot of people like basketball players to be tight ends. I like it when the Jason Peters model, when you find a guy from tight end and you give him a couple years and you move him to left tackle, because that's pretty much the only place where you can find these power forward type of players. Besides, the league. That's what you want. You want the guy that isn't tall enough to make it into the league, but has those skills, the NBA, and has those skills, and they end up going to the NFL. So tackle is pretty rough this year. There's like a couple of guys like Martinez Rankin out of Mississippi State. He started as a tackle. Now they're looking at him as a center. There's Tyler Crosby out of Oregon. He could be a tackle legit. I'm not quite sure when he goes, maybe 2nd or 3rd round. I don't really see any more tackles in this part of the draft, to be honest. I do think Will Hernandez should go the next couple picks. Could go right now. For the Seahawks, I also heard a lot of Isaiah Oliver cornerback stuff. I don't know if now's a good enough time to take him, but that's pretty much my. Also, Harold Landry's still out there, isn't he?
Yeah, it might be the ankle. I don't know if the medical workup, because as an edge rusher, he's ideal. I mean, the bend, the get off, finishing.
Just to troll the Ravens a little bit, because it's fun. The best tweet I've seen from somebody is Tom Kingsbury, who said Hayden Hurst and Rashad Perriman in Baltimore should both be entering their prime playing age in about 2011.
I remember Danny Watkins,
Rashad Penny.
Fireman.
Yeah, the fireman. This age thing can get Rashad Penny.
Yeah.
Whoa!
Hello.
Well, this is kind of a Paul Richardson moment, right? This is a Paul Richardson moment.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
He's the yards after contact guy. This guy loves the yards after contact. That's what
It's funny because when I watch him, I see a guy who goes down a lot on first contact. So it's interesting that he gets that, but that's kind of the difference between yards after contact and yards through contact. And I wish people were studying yards through contact, because you can you wrap someone and bounce off their knee and he goes 50 yards and that's yards after contact. But you hit and wrap somebody and they plow through for another 3 to 4 yards. And that to me is far more important and not inflated like yards after contact. But as you can see, this is CJ Precise attempt 2.0, trying to get someone who can who can win after the catch as a receiver, who's a little bit far more refined as a runner between the tackles, because he's very good in the pro style kind of gap power game, gap power trap counter, what San Diego State runs. He's excellent at that. And he's got the size to be a powerful guy, but I didn't see it. And he can't pass protect worth a flip at this stage. Like, to me, this was I think there's 12 backs in this class who were better than the top 7 last year. That's how good this class is. But he was at the bottom half of that range for me. There were about 5 or 6 backs I would have preferred to Rashad Penny here. And Seattle, I'm just kind of shocked by that one. To me, that's not even a Paul Richardson pick. For me, because I love Paul Richardson, but that one's that's off the wall, baby.
What I mean by Paul Richardson pick is that their board, a la the Patriots, their board is out of sync with everybody else's, and they don't care. They don't care. Maybe they were trying to trade down one more time. In no world that makes sense to me does Rashard Penny go ahead of Darius Geis or Nick Chubb or Sony Michel or Ronald Jones. But we barely even talked about fantasy football tonight, but I mean, let someone else take Rashard Penny high in rookie drafts because he's a first round pick now. And the lack of pass protection, this offensive line. I don't know. The Seahawks are going to continue to just throw good money away after bad, trying to build some sort of running game. I don't know that Penny's going to be significantly better than Carson. Well, really, I mean, look at all the picks and money they've thrown out. Eddie Lacy last year, it was only $3 million, but still they used him up. They've got.
I'm just laughing at Matt with the hat change.
Oh, back to the 49ers.
Where's my Rams hat? Hold on.
Right,
hold on.
that's the one you've been wearing all off season that you need to keep wearing.
That's true. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see, and especially with how the Seahawks have hemorrhaged players on the defensive side of the ball. Offensive line, I understand. With Will Hernandez there, you can't miss with a pick like Will Hernandez.
That's just a ridiculous. I mean, I've been cheering for the Seahawks since Marshawn Lynch got traded there, and that is a ridiculous pick. I mean, it may work out if
it's not going to work out.
Every offensive line, every defensive line in the NFL just craps out, and we're using, arena league offensive linemen in the rest of the league.
I mean, Matt, you put that Rams hat on, and this is a Rams defense they're going to face 2 times next year that has Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh. And you've drafted a running back in the first round that can help you in pass protection, and you're going to rely on Russell Wilson run for his life, 2 times a season against the Rams. Like,
you drafted a substitute teacher who has no ability to control a classroom. Yeah. I mean, that's basically what you got in Rashad Penny.
And you've got Connor Williams on the board. You've got, Will Hernandez on the board. There are other things you could do to protect the guy that's basically your offense right now. Yeah. This wasn't it.
Let's just say, let's go like sports talk radio style here for a second, but after they had assembled the Legion of Boom and made the trade for Marshawn Lynch and had Russell Wilson fall into their laps, this team has done a terrible job drafting. Maybe the worst in the whole league. It's worse than the Browns, maybe.
So I'm not going to.
And let's just say this, because I got to say this. Bloom loves trolling the Seahawks because he does not like him some Russell Wilson.
Well, he can host an award show.
Yes, he could.
Let me try to defend this pick, or at least get into the mindset of why they would do this. The one move they made was DJ Fluker on the offensive line. That's a power guard, okay? If you're trying to build a power game and you believe Rashad Penny's your power guy, and I also don't like it when you draft a guy that can't pass protect, because then it's so obvious what's going to happen. And obviously, he's on the field. This is what's going to happen. Maybe they're thinking, we don't care if you know. We're going to DJ Fluker you right up to your face and get more guys that are big and large, maybe like Chuck's Okafor, or just these power scheme guys that are plus 320 plus, and just come right after you. That I'm not trying to defend the pick, but I'm trying to get inside why they possibly could convince themselves.
No, that's the
other guys have medical issues. Maybe, I don't know. Dr. Gene would have been a good resource at this point, but I know that the different guys that you would think would be higher than him possibly have medical issues.
Yeah, I mean, certainly they are concerned about Michelle with the bone on bone. There may be concerns about the fact that Nick Chubb had the 3 ligament tears, 2 years ago. So you have concerns about that. Maybe, Kerryon Johnson is somewhat unproven compared to the amount of time that Penny's been there. So, I mean, Darius Geis, the character, quote unquote, concerns possibly with this. And, as I'm talking, we've got, Ryan Shazier, who's walking out here to make the pick, which is just a fantastic moment in draft day.
And the Penguins won tonight too. So, that's because I have to console myself. The only way this pick is going to make me sad is if it's Mason Rudolph. And I say that, and the football gods might find some way to
No, you got lucky. Terrell Edmunds.
In the first round?
Yeah.
The other Edmunds. Now, this is a really interesting pick because now the safety has been a very strong association. It was Jesse Bates. It was Justin Reed. But instead it's Edmunds. And I forget who it was. There was a national writer who said, don't be surprised if there are 2 of the Edmunds brothers in the first round. And, of course, Trey is the special teamer and backup running back for the Saints. So, wow. Well, I have to say that I'm not nearly up to speed on Edmunds' game as I would be Reed or Bates, but they're addressing the right spot. But at the same time, some of these, the Sean Davis didn't work out, and we'll see. But so you said we got lucky, Matt. What do you mean?
Well, you ended up in a situation where you didn't take who you said you were going to take, which was Mason Rudolph.
Yeah.
So I mean, I like Rudolph, okay, but
Right.
I just think that at this stage of the game, you take Rudolph over Lamar Jackson, you take over Kyle Lauletta, you take Rudolph over, let's insert a couple more names in here that I'm sure Mark could give us some ideas about that might be worthwhile here to make his alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Pittsburgh and you want to draft a quarterback at this point, I mean, yeah, I think all the names you mentioned, Matt, would make much more sense. I think if Pittsburgh wants to address quarterback later in this draft, there are guys that can get like a Chase Litton, for example, or a Nick Shimanock that might make more sense, in the 4th, 5th, 6th round than Mason Rudolph right here for a team that I think has some time with Roethlisberger where you don't need to worry about 2 years down the road or so. So yeah.
So I need me at Jacksonville hat if they get Lamar Jackson at this point. I think
the too. So yeah,
truly Jacksonville. It's just we're 4 picks away from Lamar Jackson potentially falling out of the first round, which just feels unthinkable. But I suppose that we touched on something with the idea of not having the agent, not making himself as accessible in the draft process. But actually, Waldman, you anticipated, while we have Mark here, we're not going to do any coverage tomorrow night, so we may hear Mason Rudolph. We'll hear him tomorrow if we don't hear him in the next 4 picks. We'll certainly hear Lamar Jackson if we don't. But there are a lot of other names. Give the folks out there a few other names, because this class, the top 4, 5, took up so much of the conversation that there are some potentially good second-tier prospects that we could be hearing about in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, we've touched on Rudolph. Matt mentioned Kyle Lauletta, who we both like. Lauletta, I think, he gets knocked for sort of not having the power arm and doesn't have the huge velocity numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But again, as we've kind of touched upon throughout this portion of the show, NFL teams are operating 20 and under. So 85, 90% of offensive throws are in that range. So Kyle Lauletta can run an NFL offense. I don't have a question about that. So I think Lauletta is a guy to watch, on day 2. Other names, Luke Falk, although I know, some people might be higher on him than I am, but I still think that, he's got sort of the, intelligence behind a lot of what he does. And Mike Leach basically, said, okay, I'll call passing plays. You do the rest of the stuff. I don't feel like calling running plays. Running plays are boring. They're then I like to spread the ball around and throw the ball. So, but I think Luke Falk does some things from a mental standpoint that some teams are going to like. Mike White's another name. I like Logan Woodside, and he's probably going to be more of a day 3. And perhaps, and Matt and I have, we disagree on Logan Woodside, but that's okay. It's okay to disagree on players, people. It happens all the time. Okay. But I perhaps have a type. This time last year, I was saying, oh, guys, who we might hear, in day 2? Brad Kaya, because Brad Kaya is a perfect pocket quarterback, with great footwork and mechanics, and he fell, because okay, so maybe I'm higher on Logan Woodside, but I think he's a guy to watch, probably more day 3, but somebody to keep in mind. Kirk Bankert, his first half against Miami, you can make the case that was some of the best quarterback tape we saw this entire draft season. And then he stared down a route and threw a pick 6, and they brought up the turnover chain. But until then, it was great stuff. So there are some fun names to watch, as we get into day 2 and day 3. It's going to be an interesting quarterback class. I think there are some guys in the back half of this class, even UDFA types like Peter Pouliot or Chad Kanoff, that might come off the board sort of, late day 3 or not even get drafted, but could make some noise as we get into a training camp.
Can I ask a question? This is a pure, I don't know this. There's another Allen, the guy from Texas A&M. Not Josh Allen.
Kyle Allen, yeah.
What's the deal with that guy?
You don't know him, and I think that's probably the answer to that question.
I mean,
there's actually a third Allen. There's Austin Allen, too.
Yeah.
The younger brother of Brandon Allen. So, I mean, we could have 3 Allens come off the board. So, I doubt it.
Which one influenced Josh to make the tweets he made in high school? That's the question.
Oh my goodness, that's a brilliant question, and I'm going to defer.
It's late, I think that's a good one to just deflect and leave it at that.
Can we go back to Terrell Edmunds for a second, just for a second? Mm-hmm. You're talking about a guy that I'm loving these Spark scores. I do. I swear by them. And age is a factor in there. But you're talking about a guy that's got better physical attributes than 97% of the safeties that are currently NFL. He's a son of a pro. And he's known for being a dime player, being a matchup against tight ends. Okay, you're the Steelers. Hayden Hurst just went to the Ravens. Gronk isn't Gronk. You always got to go through Gronk. You know, I feel like it was a good pick for the Steelers, and I don't, you know, I just thought I'd throw that out there. You know, that was a surprisingly decent pick.
Yeah, and may Brian Shazier make it back to the field, but that kind of hyper athletic presence in the middle of the field in a dime package, I think is what the Steelers were looking for there. And you mentioned the spark scores. You had the 4.47, 41-inch vert, I think 11'2" broad jump. And the Steelers famously took Jarvis Jones in the first round. And that was enough for them to say, I guess we're never going to take a subpar athlete who's hyper productive in the first round. And Taven Bryan goes to Jacksonville. A lot of people had him in the first round. And another one of these defensive tackles with a lot of the traits, not necessarily the skills, but Jacksonville's going to keep running them at you on the defensive side of the ball. And with the edge rush they have, certainly Bryan's going to have a chance to develop and have an impact with all of the abilities with the traits he has, if the abilities can come online. We're 3 picks away. Mark, I'll go back to you as a Patriots fan. 31. Give me a name or two you might be fearing, a name or two. I mean, Lamar Jackson. And as much as it would be impossible to bring Lamar Jackson to the building and be like, we believe in you as the future of the franchise.
Even though we passed you at 23. Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't like you at 23, but man, we love you at 31. That's how much we love you. Now, I mean, what's been interesting is there's some options at corner, you know, and every time I've sort of gone through this draft for New England, I come to 31 and I think corner, you know, I think Isaiah Oliver, you know, sort of fits the Patriots mold, guy that can play press man, kind of a longer corner, fits sort of what teams are looking for right now at that spot. Mike Hughes, you know, a little bit more undersized, sub 6 foot corner, but a sticky guy that, you know, you can run out there in man coverage. You know, they don't have a glaring need at corner because, you know, you add Jason McCourty, but if you watch Super Bowl 52, they had a glaring need at corner that night. And they clearly need to address the position and get some guys out there. So, I mean, corner's an option here. They could go linebacker, but I'm not sure really, you know, you lose out on Leighton Vander Esch, you lose out on, you know, Evans. So you're probably going to wait and look at more maybe a Fred Warner, maybe go Lorenzo Carter. Maybe you try to get some sort of upside there, a guy that you could do some different things with, some versatility. You could put him on the edge, you could put him more off ball. But who knows? In all likelihood, they're going to trade out with the New York Giants who come up and draft Mason Rudolph. I mean, that's probably the way my dad ends. They draft Isaiah Wynn. They don't draft Lamar Jackson, and they trade out with their second, third, first round pick. And it makes my night a little bit easier because I have to do one story and not two. But okay.
Well, and the Vikings pick is in. I think I've seen Will Hernandez mocked to the Vikings a lot.
Yeah.
And
the Iowa kid could wind up here too.
Interior offensive line. And if Mason Rudolph goes against Lamar Jackson, well, it'll make us sad, but in another way, well, it'll just add another layer to the narrative when Lamar Jackson ends up being Lamar Jackson.
Harold Landry's still out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, you know, the Patriots ran his D-line drills very famously. Pro Day.
And they do need, I mean, they're getting Derek Rivers back, but they could use an edge guy. And if you're getting somebody that was talked about being a top 5 type player at 31.
I'll just say this, the amount of times we've mentioned Lamar Jackson, if you've been playing a drinking game tonight, I advise you to eat a couple of bananas before you go to bed.
Drink some water. Drink lots of water. Water is your friend, kids. It's a round one of the draft is supposed to be a marathon, not a sprint. Hopefully you guys hydrated.
Absolutely. And Mike Hughes goes actually to the Vikings.
Oh yeah.
And I like some of these fits. Like I like Taven Bryan going from the University of Florida to Jacksonville. You know, I like how Josh Rosen's going from UCLA to Arizona. Those things make sense to me. And I feel like sometimes these players, we look at them as just players and we forget that it's really about a match. And if I remember so many times through Jets history, Jets fans say, "Oh, they should have drafted Ed Reed. Oh, they should have done this or that." Would Ed Reed would have been Ed Reed if he had showed up and Ray Lewis wasn't there and Herm Edwards was there greeting him? You know, these teams and these players have to match for this thing to be a success.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that you don't want Dwight Schrute to be your manager at least early on in Dwight Schrute's career.
And to that point, Matt, what about Mike Hughes, who was born in North Carolina, played at UCF and UNC? Now he's going to Minnesota where he'll see snow for the first time.
Was didn't he go to JC at Garden City?
Did he?
Garden City, Nassau County.
Oh, there you go. Well, look at that.
See the Jets showing up the Patriots a little bit.
Don't worry about it. That's why they call me the daddy.
Dropping some knowledge.
I like this dynamic. We got a Jet and a Patriot and a Brown and a Steeler. I mean, this is great.
It's rivalry night here on footballguys.com, kids.
Well, one thing you said earlier about talking about the Jets, like they have their first 3 games in 11 days. So I don't see Sam Darnold starting this season early. That's going to be a rough – they play a Monday Night Football against the Lions. They play Sunday against the Dolphins. And then they play Thursday night. 3 games in 11 days. So how's a rookie quarterback going to do that?
Yeah, Darnold will play whenever McCown gets hurt.
Which will happen,
right? And Bridgewater's got to get traded to Jacksonville or Cincinnati. I really want to see that happen. We got the Patriots pick and used to the Vikings. I mean, you've got Xavier Rhodes on one side. Trey Waynes hasn't quite panned out as a first round pick, but Hughes I think can hopefully make up where Waynes wasn't able to deliver on the first round pick goods. I think they also have Mackenzie Alexander too. They've been investing a lot of picks at cornerback. Now we go back on drink again, Lamar Jackson watch. And I mean, one of the things out as an aside, or really is, you can tell it's getting late. One of the core stories of the draft is as Matt was saying, the destinies change, right? Lamar Jackson sure seems to me to be the kind of player that was ready for this and wasn't. I mean, this is going to be something where if he does fall out of the first round, is that something that changes the course of his career? Whereas if he had been seen, as you were describing, Waldman, if he's taken early and a team wants to leverage his running ability and throws him to the wolves, Patriots pick is in. So we see some of these things. We see some of these things with trades where destinies of players, destinies of teams change. And go ahead.
I think it's ideal because when you really look at it, I know that a lot of people will sit there and throw stats at you about how, the odds of becoming a good quarterback after you're not picked in the first round are infinitesimally small. And, but when you look at the fact that the percentages are so low already, unless you're the first overall pick, are you just weighing one level of hell versus the other? It's not really like you're still in hell. So, I mean, if you're going to look at it from that standpoint, why don't you just look at the talent of the player? Look at the individual talent of the player and the fit with the offense and look and kind of keep it from that standpoint. And you have to understand that, Drew Brees was a guy that, I remember back in the day, the Falcons trading for Michael Vick and giving away essentially LaDainian Tomlinson and Drew Brees 1 and 2. So Russell Wilson in the third, in the second round. So these are guys that people knew they were talents, but had questions about them. And most of those questions were frankly misguided. So we're going to look at a guy like Jackson, and he doesn't fit the cultural ways of the NFL because he couldn't maybe verbalize the offense in the way that they expect him to do so, though there were people who said that he truly understood the offense and really saw it very well and could whiteboard it in a way, but the way that he communicated it wasn't as cool and collective in the way that maybe Josh Allen could. But at the same time, that's great. Some people do really well in the interview and other people do really well on the job while the person in the interview is still talking about, things on a level that just belong in the interview and not on the field. So, in these situations, you just kind of have to realize that we can talk about the odds of the picks, but the data is still somewhat inconclusive because there's just not enough of it to really pinpoint. And the variables there's so many variables to everything that's going on with fits that it really just comes down to looking at the talent fit team kind of dynamic here.
So what if I told you, Mark Schofield, that the Patriots are about to select Sony Michel with the 31st pick?
It's an intriguing pick. I mean, obviously you lose out on Dion Lewis. You lose him to Tennessee. You get a potential replacement for him, more of a home run hitter type. I'm surprised they go running back here because, it's a position where, you've made an addition there. You've got Rex Burkhead in the stable. You've got James White in the stable. You have Mike Gillislee in the stable. But to get a guy like him, I hope that they got the medicals cleared out because, as we saw yesterday, there's the bone-on-bone in knee that was floated around by Roto World that there's a knee issue there. So there's always a concern there. But if the medicals clear out, this is, and we talked about this. It's interesting. We talked about this last year when teams traded up to get Mahomes and to get Watson, and you saw that some teams had a clear path for the future. This is the kind of pick that makes me think the Patriots have a path to the future as well, because you want to get in a running back that you can perhaps build your next offense around, and that's what they might be getting, provided the knee holds up.
Well, but how shocking is it that Darius Geis isn't in the top three running back picks?
Not so much for me, but I'm a little surprised about Sony Michel just from the fact that he fumbles the ball a whole hell of a lot. And, he's in the reserve tier for me in terms of his ability to, hang on to the football. But that said, if he can correct that, and we saw Alvin Kamara do it right away, and he was in that low tier last year, they're getting a player that I know Bill Belichick really loved when he had him by the name of Robert Edwards out of Georgia. And Robert Edwards was the rookie of the year, a fantastic player who could catch the ball and run between the tackles, who basically was a victim to the short-sightedness of the Pro Bowl.
Beach volleyball.
Beach, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whose idea was that, people?
Yeah, exactly. So
Beach volleyball.
But when you look at Michel, this is a guy who has tremendous vision, understands how to anticipate creases. And it's so important because the best runners, you can take one frame and freeze it, and they're accelerating towards a line that isn't even open yet. And that's something that usually takes a runner 1 to 2 years in the league to develop if they haven't already mastered that. And Georgia runs, its varieties of zone and gap plays and duo and all the different things that you see in the NFL. And he does it very well. He doesn't have as good a vision, in my opinion, as his backfield mate, but he's also maybe the best pass protector in this draft. So you're getting a back who basically gives you everything that those other players on the roster give, but you can basically say, thanks, it was nice having you guys. You were a nice cheap substitute. Now we've got Sony Michel. Here we go. And maybe the Ravens get this right at the end and they trade up. So let's see if
the
they
Ravens,
yeah,
on the clock.
See, so it was it Jacksonville or Cincinnati?
Eagles.
No,
the
the
Eagles
Eagles had the pick, and the Eagles had no picks the next 2 days.
So is it Mason Rudolph, Joe Flacco clone,
right?
But without the
Lamar Jackson.
This is what I was going to talk about. I'm wondering how many of these teams with established starters. I'm not talking about the teams like the Jets with McCown or McCarron. I'm talking about teams with Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers. A lot of people on the internet were thinking they're going to take Lamar Jackson. They're going to sit him. None of these things happen. They looked at a 40-year-old Brady and they think Eli Manning's 37 and he's won 2 Super Bowls and he's healthy and they don't have the stomach for a quarterback controversy. They don't have any willingness for the first time that older veteran throws a pick for the cameras to go right to the rookie who's sitting there with a clipboard and say, when's it going to be Lamar Jackson time? That's like a coach's worst nightmare. So maybe the Ravens eat my words, but it's supply and demand. And we're all talking about Lamar Jackson, but when the demand dries up and there's excess supply, that's where we're at. I feel like these teams that people thought were going to be buyers were not quarterback buyers.
Right, because we got the Buffalo and Arizona, again, the immediate need teams, or the teams with the long-term need with just stopgaps. So there was the Eagles trading out of 32 seemed to be the most likely trade down in the whole first round because they have no picks on the second day. And now I'd imagine that they got at least one pick in addition to the pick that they traded down to. The Ravens, and it maybe this is another Marcus Davenport. Maybe they take Harold Landry. I mean, a hallmark of the Ozzie Newsome regime has been when there's a player that falls too far, regardless of need, regardless of what we thought going into the draft, the Ravens will scoop that player up. And certainly with their 2 trade downs, they've acquired the extra ammunition. So one last burst of a little bit of adrenaline, if we have any left, for this last pick, and one that certainly is the Steelers and the Browns fan here.
Well, if they pick Lamar, I'm trying to get a crack unit together so that we can move that. Yeah, God darn it.
It happens.
Wow.
So can we please bring my Browns back to Cleveland and we can move that zombie ass team over to Indianapolis again and they can take that into the luck. Wow, what a pick. That's fantastic. That's a fantastic
Look at how they moved
pick.
the board tonight.
Yeah.
And look at also
tonight.
look at who there was a talk about who they brought in as a backup, which I think is kind of a
RG3,
backwards ass move to say that's who we're picking to, pair with him. I want to see who's going to be else in that quarterback room because I mean Flacco can do a lot to
I'll tell you who's in the quarterback room.
Josh Woodrum
and in the coaching staff, Marty Morningweg. And the quarterback coach, I think David Pulley, who were the team with Michael Vick when he came back with the Eagles.
True. Very true.
James Urban, not David Pulley.
Yeah.
James Urban.
And Morningwig certainly was helpful as a part of being able to get the most out of Vick at that time. And this is a player who I think we can all agree is way better than Michael Vick was at the beginning of his career as a passer.
Yeah.
Maybe not be as dynamic as a runner. And now he gets time to learn the offense, not be under pressure, to have to, with his head swimming with 8 million things going on at one time. And
how about the fact that he took Hayden Hurst at 25, suspecting that Lamar Jackson would be there at 32?
Well, that's because I think that's because Ozzie Newsome probably knew, more than anybody as a GM in the NFL. What the culture's like in the NFL and go, these dumbasses aren't going to take Lamar Jackson.
It's a small fraternity.
Yeah. So maybe the most significant pick of the entire first round happens at the end. I think, again, we look at the coaching staff and we look at this combination of the quarterback coach and the offensive coordinator and what they did with Michael Vick when his career was revived. And I noticed it just because they got RG3. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But now it becomes a lot more interesting. And
I can't get over that he wanted Lamar Jackson and he took Hayden Hurst and he's that tight. I have to say it again. That is serious.
For his last trick, for the finale rack.
You just sat there, 8 more slots, nobody's business.
Yeah.
Ozzie Newsome. And and this will be the last Ozzie Newsome draft. And as a Steelers fan, I'm a bit relieved.
My favorite player growing up as a kid, man.
Yeah, and sorry, Browns. Sorry, take the Thunder, steal the Thunder of all the other quarterback picks of the first round. And hey, Giants fans, maybe you'll get Mason Rudolph after all without having to trade back into the first round. So congratulations. Woo! Well, after all that, I think we'll all remember this first round. And wow. And Mark, you want to add anything about this Ravens Jackson marriage before we sign off?
As a resident of the state of Maryland, I am dreading the next 4, 5, 6 years of my life because I think it's the perfect fit. I think that, again, hats off to Ozzie Newsome for working the board the way he did. It's sort of the ideal situation for Lamar Jackson, short of, I guess, maybe New Orleans. It's sort of the perfect sort of situation for him. I think the Ravens had a really good night. I mean, to move the board the way they did, the Hurst pick, you're wondering about that when it's made, but it's clear that they had a vision. And this is a team that likes to use 2 tight end sets. They like to go 12 personnel. Now they've got that again. They've got a guy that they think can replace Max Williams, and they've got their quarterback of the future and a room that should develop him well. And in a situation where people will be excited for him, but there's probably not going to be that much pressure on him. So I think it's perfect for them.
Well, it's been a perfect night as usual. Thanks to Dr. Gene Bramall, Charles McDonald, and Justice Mosqueda, fabulous setting the edge. Matt Batanti, Draft Daddy, Mark Schofield, Inside the Pylon. Eric Stoner joining us via text message. It's always good to have the ghost of Eric Stoner. And it's fun, guys. This audience has been tremendous. We've been over 200 viewers all night. And it's fun that people give us some of your time and your bandwidth, your wavelength, because we love football. We love reacting and thinking about this stuff as it slants through our brain, and we know you do too. It's been a wonderful tradition. We hope we can continue it for a long time. and in football guys, this always marks the turning over our calendar. And we're going to start launching all of our player and team pages and rankings. And it's that release of energy. It's really incredible that during the NHL playoffs, NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball, this still takes the front page, and for great reason. So Matt Waldman, Matt Batanti, Mark Schofield, Charles McDonald, Justice Mosqueda, Gene Bramall, and I've got to give another nod to Eric Center, everyone else out there. Thank you, everybody, for sharing this night with us, and we'll keep sharing these seasons as we go forward. And we'll be seeing you around always, and to see Salami in Dallas also, or in Arlington. All right, everybody, we'll be joining you.
I don't think I can resist the dark side anymore.
That's it. That's
I'd
it.
have to be a Ravens fan. I don't know, man.
Your father-in-law was part of Baltimore PD, right? So
I just don't know, man.
Everybody out there know. And one of the things I've loved sharing with y'all is just that we're all living and dying like everyone else out there. This all starts with a love of the game and a team and the way the game pulls you in emotionally, and we can be analyzing it and handling it from an arm's length, but our fortunes are still rising and falling, and we're feeling that whole roller coaster too, which keeps us coming back year after year. So we hope you'll continue to come back year after year with us, everybody. Thank you for giving us the privilege of sharing this time with us, and we'll be seeing you around. Stay classy.